So it appears we're finally live this time. So apparently, I'm still having the same issue that I had last week with the scheduled stream not wanting to connect for some reason. So I know I at least got the message this time. So hopefully, everybody can find the new link, and I'll have to get it all spiffed up. Yeah, Ronald. Yeah, it's the same thing as last week. Yeah, I don't know why, but if I set a schedule and I make everything and make it all fancy, and then I go live and I'm just staring at the spinning circle endlessly and I'm like, this isn't right. And I reload and same thing, same thing. So yeah, I already sent a message to support before, but I think I'm gonna have to like go through and figure out with YouTube support or something, trying to figure out what's going on. But anyway, yeah, I know everybody said they at least noticed me typing away like crazy. Hey guys, I see you, but I can't talk yet. Um, but yeah, so this is a different topic for me, something I'm not super versed in, but something that basically this is like my first live stream of just kind of what's been on my mind for the past week or so. So what goes up must come down. Spinning wheels got to go around. Yeah, yeah. Live streaming is still it is a it seems easy, it sounds easy, but you run into all kinds of interesting, uh, weird things and stuff. So it's nowhere near as easy as everybody makes it seem. But yeah, as soon as I get my space quiet and everything set up, and then I spend 20 minutes trying to get started. So gonna give it a couple minutes for everybody to start making their way over. I know tonight is not sponsored by Canada Dry. We're not sponsored, but I can't go without ginger ale. Only easy for makeup gurus. Yeah, it's like that's one of the main things you see everywhere, and it's like they have the most perfect looking videos with great production values and stuff. It's like, how did they afford that and do that? Just found out there will be a female Thor. I take it so a female Thor movie. I guess that'll be interesting, but I'm not super up to date with the whole Marvel scene, so I don't exactly know how they're going to work all that. But I'm not surprised. I guess there's a female Thor in the comics or something. Again, I've only dabbled in Marvel comics. I'm a huge Batman guy, so I'm always more on the DC side of things. Melinda made it. Thanks for jumping over. Yeah, I don't know why it decided to just give me the same headaches as last time. So uh, yes, indeed. How are we all on this lovely week of September? Um, Canada Dry or Schweppes? I mean, I like both, but push come to shove, it's Schweppes. That I mean, they're very similar, but yeah, if we're talking just regular, buy at the store, big name brand ginger ales, for me, it's Schweppes. Closely followed by Canada Dry. I usually get whatever's on sale. Uh, Not big on Seagram's. It's very sweet. Not a fan of Werner's either. I've tried basically every version of ginger ale possible. Usually I try to get a couple of at least the Reed's Island ginger ales. Comes in the glass bottles and they microbrew it with real ginger and stuff. So that's how I get my ginger fix. But I always have some Canada Dry or Schweppes on hand. But yeah, I could go on about ginger ale for an hour. So hey, Metro's in the house. Uh, Brian's in the house. Pete made it over. Yeah, ginger beer always. Fantastic stuff. So, yeah, hello, fellow movie brats. Yeah, that is definitely something we're going to be getting into, and it's honestly both the subject of tonight's discussion. I kind of picked it for a certain reason. I've been thinking about this particular person, about John Milius, pretty much since getting back into Apocalypse Now, because I suddenly realized I'd never gotten too seriously into his filmography, but I know all these things that he's done or worked on and stuff, and outside of the top 4 or 5 guys of that generation of, the so-called movie brats, there are only 4 or 5 who are really still working and only maybe 6 or 7 that are household names. And, there are still a lot of people who are still actually around from that time period, but, either they've retired or they didn't have a big flashy fancy job. And outside of people like that, like us, I don't think, well, I just get this weird idea of, instead of it being a rock star getting mobbed by fans, like I would totally. I'm trying to think of what my reaction would be if, like, I somehow met Walter Murch, I'd probably be like, "Oh my god!" He'd just be because he's a very quiet guy, but I'm sure he would be very taken aback because it would be like me meeting a rock star, meeting Walter Murch, one of the uh, great gurus of film sound and one of the best, film editors of the past, uh, you know, 30, 40 years. And again, most people have no idea who that is, but, he was right there in the thick of it at school with the rest of these guys. But the thing about Milius is he's so completely opposite and different to the rest of them, and politically, I don't agree with him at all. But I think a lot of the stuff that he does is there's some posturing involved, and the whole building of this macho image and things that kind of harkens back to an earlier time. So in a way, I suppose it's similar to the uh, older school of thought where the film director was the big manly man and very gruff and very direct and not very uh, emotional. So the way John Ford would be gruff on film sets and would bawl John Wayne out, or Howard Hawks was, the real man's man, or Victor Fleming, or stuff like that. So there's part of that, and I think people pick up on the whole image and myth making too much. Um, but that being said, it's a fascinating person to talk about, and again, there's a whole bunch of different things we're going to get into, and again, exactly as Garrick says, he's one of the guys where you really don't even realize that he had a hand on something until much later on, or you see the credits, because he's only directed a certain amount of features, but his writing, he's rewritten drafts, done drafts for things, done pieces of films as favors, and was also, well, pretty much he was a script doctor for a long period of time. I don't know how many things were under a table or if he was specifically referred to as a script doctor, but that's basically really what got his foot in the door, I would argue. Um, but careful with the ginger talk. No, no, I am strictly non-alcoholic, so but yeah, I can't say no to a good ginger ale. And yeah, that's the thing. Honestly, it took me a while to realize this. Most of the pictures I've seen, I haven't seen every Milius picture, and some it's been a long while. I usually like them more for the ideas and the characters and the thematics. There are certain ones I really like. Like I just rewatched Wind and the Lion last night to get prepared for this because it'd been a while since I'd seen it. And like that one and Conan the Barbarian are much more than you would think they were, going in. The Dillinger's also surprisingly good for an early, lower budget film. Um, but usually I tend to like his writing more than his directing. So in a sort of way, I kind of equate him with a fellow compatriot, Paul Schrader, who was, a very important writer of that generation, transitioned into directing, would also still write. And they're both, like completely opposite ends of the spectrum. Um, in terms of temperament and functionality and everything. But both of them I enjoy when they make a picture and when they direct and when it's real working. But I still think their strongest tenets are as being a great writer, and that's just the way I look at it. So there are some pictures I've seen that Milius directed that I was kind of like, like it's been a long while. I haven't seen Flight of the Intruder in a very long while, but that kind of had some studio issues and stuff. And a lot of his stuff, he's had studio problems, or he's had to rewrite scripts, or he's had scripts sold. And two films I didn't even realize he wrote at first. Both of them were sold, and they were changed in significant ways. The first was Jeremiah Johnson, and once you think about it, it's like, yeah, he totally wrote that. so, and then the other one is the really interesting picture, Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, which he wanted to direct, but Paul Newman got a hold of it, and then he wound up having to sell it. But then they made so many changes that he was like, well, it didn't really turn out the way I wrote it. So I think there are some things that you can see more of what he was going for, or what was maybe there on the page. I think the best case scenario is what happened on Apocalypse Now, where Coppola just came in and only enhance things by adding the mysticism and enhancing everything with the whole concept of making it about how Vietnam was the first psychedelic war and adding the surrealistic qualities. Um, because what was really cool is that the original project idea was much closer to, say, Doctor Strangelove in terms of being very satirical, very dark, based on all of these true events that Milius had heard from buddies or I mean, other soldiers coming back from the war and all the things they'd seen and gone through. And so most of the craziest stuff in the film is exactly what Milius had written down, and it was based in stuff that had really happened. So I don't know what that says about us as a species, but um, and Coppola was always the first person to say, everybody was asked me, where's this coming from? And he's like, well, it was, Milius's script. He was the one who, came up with this idea. And I think had the original version been made with George Lucas directing, shooting it low budget documentary style, either in California, or later on when somebody had the crazy idea of actually going to Vietnam during the war and shooting the movie, which is insane. But I think had it been directed by Lucas in, say, the early 70s, maybe after THX, because it was almost made a number of times and then eventually wound up getting stuck at Zoetrope. And when Coppola was trying to get the company started up again, he didn't have a bunch of scripts and he just had a couple laying around. One of them was Apocalypse Now. And then he's like, well, I guess I'll just direct it now. So, um, but I think that's like the best case scenario in terms of his writing actually being translated properly and further enhanced, I guess. And so the core of Apocalypse Now is still the Milius mindset and all the thematics and stuff. And of course, he was obsessed with Heart of Darkness, so that's what even gave him the idea. He was the one who was. I think he said it was in a classroom or something. Somebody's like, "Yeah, nobody could ever adapt it." Orson Welles couldn't even get it made, and so Milius was like, "It's in." There's a really good. It's like an hour-long interview on the Blu-rays, and it's really great. I recommend you watch it if you haven't. But he's like, that was like waving the red cape in front of the bull. So I was like, of course I'm going to try and do that. So, but let's see, what are we? Oh, talking about the tropical storm moving in. Yeah, everybody. Yeah, if you're having to deal with that stuff, don't put off dealing with the tropical storm just to have a film Brad talk. Um, let's see. I've just been on a few minutes. I had to get restarted. Um, yeah, Clear and Present Danger is the other nice little surprise when you realize that he wrote many of the script drafts. And I didn't even know that for the longest time. And I was always like, well, I wonder why this is so much meatier than Patriot Games. And then when I realized that, I'm like, oh, that's why there's the really good, climactic speech in the Oval Office. It's like that's where that comes from. Okay. Um, Wind in the Lion actually. There's a Letterbox Laserdisc, a DVD that was just pretty early, and then Warner Archive did it on Blu-ray. And I really want to pick up the archive disc. All I have currently is the Laserdisc, which this is what I watched last night. This is actually a nice disc. You can get it for pretty cheap, and it's got a ProLogic uh, Matrix surround track because this did get a 70 millimeter blow up. Not a whole lot of surround going on, of course, because of the age, but there is a little bit of dialogue panning. And again, transfer is actually pretty nice, nice color. It's tiny bit of aliasing here and there on, some straight edges and stuff, but that's to be expected. But it's actually a really nice disc. Includes a trailer and has this really awesome gatefold that's very stylized. You can see they tried to go for a sort of Moorish design. And again, three sides, side three and CAV. So this is a really nice MGM disc from the time. But if you're just going to get one, just go for the Warner Archive Blu-ray. There is a commentary on the DVD that got ported to the Blu-ray. So that's just one of those Warner Archive discs I've been meaning to, get for a long time. But sometimes it's hard to keep up with every disc you need. So yeah, I just go for the Warner Archive disc unless you pick up the DVD or laser disc for pretty cheap. The only problem is I really wish the laser had the really awesome poster artwork. This is still pretty good, but it's, in the sort of MGM House style of where they would take stills of the stars and give them that sort of airbrushed look. And this is one of the better jackets, but the original art that's on the DVD and Blu-ray is much better with Connery with the his face covered up and just his eyes poking through, and then the dramatic action shots underneath his big, powerful visage. But oh yeah, more Jack Ryan's with Harrison Ford. Yeah, I wish they'd done more with Alec Baldwin. I think that's one of the great losses of film history of the '90s. They were going to do another one, and then Baldwin's talked about it some. It was basically like a studio power play kept going on, where basically they found out they could get Harrison Ford, so they basically strung Alec Baldwin along, so then they could be like, "Ooh, we got Harrison Ford now. Sorry, bye." So I know there's some bad blood between the parties involved, but that's basically what happened. I don't think Ford really knew all that much about that, but yeah, I don't know why they didn't do another one after Clear and Present Danger, because all the first three were rather successful and well reviewed enough and stuff. So it's kind of strange because they definitely could have done another one. Um, and I mean, it was also strange that then all of a sudden, years later, they did Some of All Fears, which is, I mean, it's not horrible, but it's also kind of silly, especially when you look more closely at like the plot and what's going on. And I mean, I don't mind Ben Affleck, but he's just kind of a non-entity because, again, the movie could be a lot better. Um, and then the less said about the next reboot, Shadow Recruit, the better, because that that was like just sitting down on the couch and falling asleep for 2 hours, waking up and go, oh, okay, I guess that was it. I haven't seen the new. I've seen the ads for the new Amazon series, but it looks basically like just a modernized reboot of everything. So I don't know if that's any good, really. I'm not really a Tom Clancy guy. I like. I love the Red October movie, but I've never been huge on his writing style. That's every book is like 500 pages, extremely technical and stuff. But I am actually going to go back and finally reread those now that I finally got. Paperback of Red October again. So I figured just start at the beginning and reread some of them and see if I like them any better all these years later. Um, so yeah, I guess real quick I should do the couple of pickups I've got here. It's not very much, it's just a little bit. So then that way we can get right into the discussion. But first, I want to do a little showpiece. I've got to do a new video with all of the contents, but Video Connoisseur very, very graciously sent me a lovely mystery box package of some interesting items. And so that was just fantastic. I never expected, to get anything out of this channel than, other than maybe a few nice comments and stuff. So the fact that Connoisseur and Melinda have been so nice as to send me some mystery boxes, it's just been really fantastic. So I did want to show one of the things in there because it's something I've wanted to get for a long time, but I've never found it at a good price. But this will be in my next video where I go through that. But very graciously sent me a copy of the CAV Lion King box, which is in this beautiful glossy box. I never realized how like nice and glossy and thick this thing was. It's the same design as like the Sleeping Beauty Hunchback box, where you get the tray that's also glossy and just slides in there, but the actual case is just really nice, and the titles embossed and everything. So, and of course, it has the little supplemental portfolio with the lithographs. I don't want them to just spell out, but that's just fantastic. And again, I've never been a huge fan of the later era, more popular Disney titles, but if I am going to watch them, I would prefer to watch them on these Laserdisc sets. And of course, this is the last time Lion King was released without changes, because I started doing that during the DVD release. So it's basically the same as the standard CLV jacket, but it's of course CAV spread on 2 discs, and you do get a nice gatefold. And of course, this is also a super glossy jacket like the box is, so you get a nicer jacket too. And then all of the supplements are tucked away on 2 discs in its own custom jacket with the box art. So it'll be cool to rewatch this and spin through the supplements. I think what I've been meaning to do is I just want to rewatch all of the Disney titles I've picked up chronologically and just spin through their laser glory. I've been doing them like one at a time at random when I get them, but figure why not start at the beginning and work my way forward. But yeah, that will be the next video I've got to put together where I go through that wonderful mystery box. So thanks again, Connoisseur. That was absolutely fantastic. So, let's see. Oh, Ronald enjoyed the Rainbow Six novel. Okay. Yeah, I've been meaning for years to just read various Clancy books and see if there's more out there because I feel like any of the major authors that are in any way connected to the spy thriller genre, I have to at least get a more detailed knowledge of. Like I've been meaning for years. I've got to dig more into Eric Ambler and I've read, the main Lynn Dighton novels and the main Lucari novels, but there's so many Lucari novels that I still need to catch up on. Speaking of books, I did pick this one up. It's one of the proper Star Wars expanded universe I was missing. This is, I want to say it's book. I can't remember which number it is, but it's one of the later series. But this is a really nice condition paperback of the entry in the Legacy of the Force series, Inferno, and they all have these pretty nice covers. This was kind of where I had checked out during the expanded universe run. I'd really kind of checked out during the New Jedi Order because it just seemed like way too dark and not very Star Warsy. Of course, little did I know what was going to happen during the Disney reign. But I did read the first book or two of this series, but I never really finished the whole run, and it did some stuff to some of my favorite characters I was not very thrilled with, so I just never finished. So I've been trying to pick up all the various EU titles I'm missing, and so that way I can actually have them all on a shelf in chronological order because I'm that much of a nerd. But yeah, it's always tough to find these where the spines aren't shot, and I pretty much get the paperbacks because they're easier to store, and I'm a paperback guy at heart. But it's also hard to get. Disney has been republishing various novels, and they put this big, awful Legends banner over them, which is just annoying because it takes away a chunk of the art and it reminds you that Disney owns Star Wars now. So I try to pick up the original printings. But if you've never dabbled in the EU, there's tons of great stuff out there. Not every book is great. Some are a little silly. Some don't quite work, but at least they feel like Star Wars and they have context. And there's a whole universe of stuff out there to dig through. So, been trying to chip away at that for a while. And then now I don't know how I'm going to show this on here, but I'm going to try. So one of the local shops got a bunch of video store posters in, and this one is really interesting because it's the video release poster of course, a film I've been obsessed with my whole life, and I've already talked about here numerous times. But getting the original theatrical poster is a bit difficult because it's very prized by collectors because of the placement, the usage of imagery, and everything. But the video release poster is actually the original film poster, but with just a banner across the top. So when this popped up in perfectly minty shape, I had to grab this. So again, apologies, but I managed to snag the original video poster for The Living Daylights. And as you can see, it's a little bit smaller than standard sheet size, but it's the original poster art. And again, I'm trying to do this. It was rolled, so forgive me. But the only difference is at the top, it has this red banner that says "See the New Bond," but in every other instance, it is the original theatrical poster. And there's a little tiny mention of CBS Fox Video on the bottom. And also, forgive me if it makes a little bit of noise when I try to roll this back up. Let me see if I can unroll that part so you can see what I mean. As you can see, it says now available on CBS Fox Video Cassette. And honestly, these posters in the era of the video store are really cool. Sometimes they had special custom posters made, but a lot of times you can get a very cheap but professionally printed version of the original poster, but for a fraction at of the cost of the original one. You just have to be able to put up with a little video logo somewhere, or it might just say in really big letters, like across the top of this one, available now on video cassette, and then you can just hang it up, and it's not only just a poster you like or a movie you like, but it's also like, hey, wasn't it cool when we had real video stores? Yeah, I remember that. And then you just can constantly remind yourself of how old you feel. So, um, and then the other cool thing about this is, I don't know if this is going to come across, but actually printed on the back, which I didn't see this at first, it says not for sale. So this is an original promo poster. It's not a reprint of a video poster. But yeah, that's just one I always thought would be cool to have because, again, the Living Daylights posters are usually a bit more pricey. Seems a lot of collectors like to get that one because you have the gun barrel and it's very nice to frame and goes with a lot of different things. So that was really cool because I have the advanced one. It's not in the best shape, but I picked it up a couple years ago. It's the advanced one with the iconic Dalton pose, and it's also really nice to have. So it'd be cool to have both of them on the wall. So that's it for this week. Like I said, it wasn't a whole lot, but that was just a really cool little find. And I have this odd fascination with seeing video store posters. So like I love seeing what they did, and it brings back memories. And again, usually you can get them for pretty cheap, and they're a little bit smaller, so you can frame them more cheaply and more easily. Let's see what do we got going on here. Um, Oh, got some back and forth about Disney and okay. Metro was arguing with his friend at work, saying why Phantom Menace is better than Last Jedi. Oh, that's fantastic. And then of course they lose it, yeah, because like yeah, honestly, it's not that bad. Like, yeah, I think if people actually went back and dropped all their baggage at the door and sat through it again, like, yeah, it's not the greatest, and yeah, it's got a lot of problems. But again, it's not the Last Jedi. At least it has some Star Wars context. You can understand why stuff happens. There is good editing in there. There is some good photography in there. I just wish it had a better transfer on disc because the Blu-ray has a ton of DNR, and they haven't released the theatrical cut since VHS and Laserdisc. So, and of course, the original mix is fantastic. So you can still put on the Japanese Laserdisc, put up the pod race sequence, and that's a home theater demo, even with tiny bitrate LD AC3. But yeah, that's one of those. I think people just are unable to set aside their package. Yes, definitely. That is one, Melinda, that is going in a frame. Absolutely. I never thought I'd be trying to show a poster off on one of these live streams. So, um, anybody that defends the Last Jedi will lose in an argument. Yeah, they will, but you'd be surprised. Most people will if you bring up the prequels, they're just like, "Oh my god, that's so horrible." I'm like, "When was the last time you actually watched it? And when was the last time you watched the new ones?" Yeah, there's a difference. Um, Oh, talking about the, Lion King and the, cash grab remakes. Yeah, I think that's a perfect term for it. Um, if they did a big enough, marketing push, they could easily do theatrical reissues of their original titles and still make a ton of money. Disney used to reissue stuff all the time, especially in the pre-video era. You'd read about, um, like, top box office of the year, and on there would be, like, the 1980 reissue of 101 Dalmatians or the 1983 reissue of Pinocchio, stuff like that. Um Enough room to hang it, that is the best question, not exactly. I was always like, I'd love to poster collect, but, they're always too expensive, and you gotta get frames, and you gotta have space, and then stuff like finding things like that and minty shape for cheap or, like, somebody puts out a bin during a store sale that says free movie posters, and I'm like, oh crap. And then you work in a movie theater in various instances throughout your life, and you see all the stuff that's going to get junked, and you're like, no, I should save that. So yeah, I have a couple things framed, but then I have a whole I have a whole box, a long box with just my various rolled posters. So I really need to just get a better storage system and just get a ton of frames and figure out in some of this space how to hang stuff. But yeah, not necessarily every space is good for a budding poster collector. But basically, I just try to anything I find that's in good shape, that's like super cheap and is original, and it's something I actually like or an artist I'm fond of. So I've picked up like maybe 10, 15 posters over the years. I would like to get the main Bond ones and like some of the main, um, again, some of the main artists that I like. Like I'd really love an original Apocalypse Now, an original Blade Runner. Especially, I would love to have the Richard Amsel famous Raiders poster, the '82 reissue one that's used on a lot of the video covers. So. But at least with Laserdisc, you can sort of poster collect when they used original art, so it's like you get some semblance of that. But yeah, I like the idea of collecting posters, but it's very hard to get originals and not tons of reprints since something like everybody and their brother can put up a movie poster on eBay or somewhere and be like, "Oh yeah, this is original," and it's like, "Was this printed on a laser printer or something?" um, I have a couple things in frames, but I don't have anything like professionally hung. I did put my most well, I hate to say my rarest, most valuable, but it technically is. I put my poster of I have the half sheet for The Spy Who Loved Me with the Bob Peak artwork, and it's the horizontal half sheet version, which is not very often seen. I didn't even know it existed until I found it by accident, and so I just got it in a nice simple frame, so in that way it's not just floating around, and it's on like a thicker cardstock. It's not on like poster paper, so I wanted to get that in some sort of frame so it didn't just curl up on itself or something. But yeah, that's the only one that I really have like framed and tucked away so nothing happens to it. And then I have a number of album flats that are, all those are just on cardboard. So hopefully one day I can just get everything in one space and I'll have like all of my album flats and music posters and stuff in like one corner, and then just everything else is devoted to movie posters. I'd rather have movie posters than wallpaper anyway. So I guess I'm just that obsessed where it's like I don't need an interior designer. I could have a whole wall of posters here and posters on the ceiling and posters on that wall. And um, but yeah, that's what I'd love to do eventually. Um, Sega dozed off during the Aladdin remake at the theater. Yeah, well, I can see that. Yeah. Um, oh, got an original '76 King Kong that your dad got from a theater. Yeah. I've got a couple. I think that's what really got me started. I've gotten a couple from theaters. Some theaters, most theaters, they just junk stuff. A lot of theaters don't even get posters anymore. It's, they get like a generic one, but they would used to get, multiples and different types, or exhibitors could order different things. Now it seems geared much more on the big standees being super complicated to draw people's vision or attention, and not so much the main poster. Um, so usually you only find that stuff when it's just all being, junked out in a dumpster. But some will sell off posters for charity, things like that. And I got a couple. The first one I ever got, got the Die Another Day poster from the main theater where I saw it opening week, because they were doing a poster sale for charity. So I bought the Die Another Day poster. That's kind of what got me started. And then later on, I actually won a copy of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull poster, which I was like, I don't even want this. I don't want this. Oh, but it's Drew Struzan. So, okay, well, if I just cover everything with post-it notes, except for Harrison, because the likeness is pretty good. And then, like, if I cover up Shia LaBeouf with a giant picture of Short Round, I think, and everything else, so I have the Crystal Skull poster, which admittedly is the only good thing about Crystal Skull. Period. Um, that's stretching it because Drew Struzan drew it. That's it. So that's the only poster I have that I don't really want to ever frame, but that's the other one I got from a theater. But when you work in a theater, you just it's horrible to see it when people just crumple up things and they just shove it in a dumpster. So usually when you find it, it's destroyed. But yeah, usually if you know somebody you can ask or ask somebody that works there, just be like, hey, if you're gonna toss that out, just here's my number, give me a call. Um, let's see. Oh, Danny Boy's in the house. Hey, man. Uh, oh well, got a growing press book collection. Yeah, I've got a. I really. I'm trying to remember. I think I've read a number of press books, and then I have a couple reproductions in some DVD sets and stuff. But I think the only one I actually have, I do have the original press book for The Spy Who Loved Me, and it's ironic that I wound up getting an original poster, and I already had the press book for the same movie. But yeah, press books are really fun. And of course, talking about Apocalypse Now, you had to have the press book on the original release because that's where the credits were, and every single person was given this very lavish looking press book that had all these amazing stills and article pieces, and then had the actual credits because the 70 mil original print didn't have any credits. It was just nothing. So I think that's probably the most famous one that people might know. But yeah, that's another avenue of theatrical marketing that is just dead and gone. But even if you already know everything in there, it's just a cool thing to really connect you to the old times of old. um, oh, Metro almost fell asleep in the Meg in the theater. That's the most recent almost made me fall asleep movie. I don't know if I've never fallen asleep during a movie. There have been times where I wish I had, but I've always been of the mindset if I have to see something, whether somebody's watching it or you have to watch something with people or you have to go see a movie, I'm like, well, I might as well sit through the whole thing, and then even if it's bad, maybe there's something you can get out of it where it's like you try to learn something even by seeing something that's bad. So. Um, there have been times where I've been tired, but I'm like, nope, I'm gonna make it through. Gonna make it through. Uh, oh wow. Pete asks if you go to a studio and then choose any famous film to get a pristine, newly struck 35 mil print, struck off of it or positive or whatever. How much would it be? Well, I'm trying to think. I don't know off the top of my head what like the general cost is of making just like one print. I want to say it's for 35. I want to say it's probably at least a couple $1,000. But the rights and all the stuff, and then what lab would be used, what processing would be used, so on and so forth. A lot of prints that studios have are just like that, where they just made some prints off of whatever element they have. Um, and sometimes those get scanned for Laserdisc, DVD, stuff like that. But sometimes if like you go to an art house or you know anybody who worked at one, um, and you actually look at the print, you'll see sometimes some baked in scratches and stuff. And it's just like something from the 90s, 2000s that was made from whatever they had around to print from. So I think it's probably I want to say somewhere between five and $10,000. I don't know. Again, I don't know what exactly it would cost you. And I don't know who you would have to go to because most of that stuff would probably be in house at the studio until they went to whatever printing company they would use because there's not a lot of them left. So basically, you'd have to look at like stuff like the plans and the cost for modern titles, like say for example, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and what it cost for all the prints they made, and then like, okay, they made 70 prints, it cost $200,000, and just do simple math. But yeah, I think it's probably about a couple $1,000. Um, wait till you're 40, then you'll fall asleep. Yeah, I suppose. Or if you have a very, very long day, or you make the silly decision on very little sleep to go to like a multi feature or something that starts at midnight, or like a 48-hour film festival, or a midnight horror fest or something. But I've done some pretty long things, and yeah, I've gotten a little bit sleepy. Like I did a classic horror marathon one Halloween with some friends and stuff, and we started at like of 5 o'clock in the afternoon, early evening, and went all the way to like 3 or 4 in the morning, or in the cold light of day, and then, it's like you just stagger out of the room and you're just like. "Arr." I think the worst is when you see guys who sit there and um, watch every Bond film in consecutive order in one sitting, and I'm like, "That's just ridiculous." It's like, why would you do that? And by, 8, 10 hours in, they're just, like, dragging the ground, and then they're always by the time you get to, like, Octopussy, they're just out of it. I don't even know how they can get up and swap discs around and stuff, but, yeah, like, there are people who do stuff like that. Or you go to movies because it's the only thing the kids wanna see at the theater. Well, yes, I can see that. I've always been at the receiving end. I was always never given a choice, and that still happens. People like my parents or my sisters or something would be like, "Oh, we have to go see this," and I'm like, "Oh, I'd like to." Yeah, I know my vote does not matter. So, yeah, I usually I would have to hope that what I wanted to see, chimed in with what everybody else wanted to see. Otherwise, I'd have to wait and ask and ask and ask and ask and ask a million times growing up. But yeah, I am used to that. So um, someone in Italy can make 16 millimeter prints made from Blu-ray for $1,000. Huh. Um, hmm. I guess if you have your own lab going and you can actually generate your own prints, I don't think it actually costs all that much to make them. It costs more to have the equipment and the few people left who actually know what they're doing. And then I think the most would be the studio licensing fees and all that stuff. Um, Forced to see Boss Baby at a kid's birthday party. I didn't see that, but I would assume there had to at least be a couple of good Alec Baldwin, more adult oriented one liners. Metro's gearing up for Rambo 5. I've got to I've got to rewatch the first four. I'm actually interested to see what they do with that. Um, I think I said it last time. I usually just watch First Blood because that's the one I really that's the one I really like. I don't really watch two and three practically ever. And then I saw four pretty close to when it came out, and the overload of CGI blood and gore was just like it got to a point where you had to just start laughing because it was just so ridiculous. But I like the fact that the tonality was much more serious, much more grounded. I still haven't read the original First Blood book because I know it's a lot darker and it has the different ending. But yeah, I'm gonna rewatch 1 through 4 because I'm curious to see what they do with 5. I hope it turns out well, but again, you never know in this day and age. So it's weird enough seeing Stallone in the trailers and the posters and stuff, and he's just got his normal hair and he doesn't have the whole long Rambo hair going on. So I'm like, that's strange, but okay, all right. Um, let's see. Oh man, don't do that. Video Connoisseur was finally has been lacking in not seeing Casablanca all this time, and is joking with us. So, yeah, needing to see it. Yeah, actually, and for in a lot of ways, I envy people who haven't seen like the really great, amazing things yet, because getting to see it for the first time with fresh eyes, it's like it's hard to even remember what that's like. But yeah, Casablanca is one of those very select few that you need to see it at least 10 times before, it every time you find something new. And even if you know every single line by heart, which admittedly I practically do, every time I see it, I manage to find something else in there, and it's just mind-boggling. But that's what's really, I think, the secret of its staying power, the fact that it's not just timeless, but it's constantly rewarding. So yeah, connoisseur, get on that, man. Like, trust me, like you'll watch it once, you'll watch it another 10 times the next week because you just can't stop. I don't even know. I lost count for me. So I think the first time I saw it all the way through was I can't remember if it was TCM or yeah, I think it was TCM pretty early on, uh, pretty close to after when we first got TCM, because I don't think um, we got TCM in our cable package because it would come in and go out because they would change the packages all the time. But I think we first got TCM when we first upgraded to, I forget the name of the company, but it wasn't Comcast then, but it became Comcast later. But we first got TCM like in the late 90s. And so I saw Casablanca all the way through probably for the first time when it was about eight, nine ish, something like that. I knew what it was and I'd seen pieces of it, but I'd never seen it all the way through. And then I got a tape copy at a local store used, and I just watched it until it did not play anymore. And then before that, I rented it a lot, and then upgraded to DVD pretty early on when I got into DVD. But yeah. Um, oh my gosh, he's serious. Dinosaur popped in his tape and it was messed up. So yeah, it's not mine. I think I still have mine floating around somewhere. I don't think I sold it, but yeah, I definitely grabbed the Criterion CAV laser. It's amazing. I think the Criterion CAV Laserdisc of Casablanca is the best version, short of the newest 75th anniversary Blu-ray that they did a 4K scan for. I think those two are the only ones that get the grayscale just right. The MGM ones are really good. The CAV box they did is really good, but I think Criterion's better. It just seems a little bit more 1940s. You get much more of the silvery quality of the grayscale. And I've seen a couple prints of Casablanca, and that's how they also look. So I'd say grab the Criterion CAV laser, or just go ahead and get that. You can get the Blu-ray. It's like $5 or $10. Get the 75th anniversary one, not the older 70th one. But yeah, that's the way to go. Um, Yeah, Metro. Honestly, it's been a long time since I've seen Rambo 2 and 3, so I'm kind of looking forward in a way to rewatching them. I didn't like how they kind of lost a lot of the substance of the first movie, and I just stayed away from Rambo for a long time because I thought all it was just running around and blowing everything up and just a lot of mindless action. But then when I saw First Blood, I'm like, oh wow, okay, this is totally different. Um, and exactly as Melinda points out, it was completely a Vietnam allegory, and then it becomes almost in a lot of ways like a morality play. And it's very gritty and very human and very realistic in a lot of different ways. So then when I actually got to, Rambo 2, I was like, and that's all gone. And then when you realize that James Cameron had his hands in the screenplay, it's like, yeah, this is like comparing Alien to Aliens, but at least Aliens has some of the intelligence of Alien, whereas Rambo 2, it's just like a complete 180. And then Rambo 3 is like trying to do the same thing, but like, 4 or 5 years down the road. But yeah, I'm gonna give him another shot because it's been a long, long while. Um, let's see. In the span of 3 days, Garrus watched the director's cut of Gettysburg, which is 4.5 hours. Went to the Fathom show of Lawrence of Arabia, and saw It Chapter 2 and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and somehow stayed awake. Yeah. Well, that's it's definitely doable. Um, I guess you could do, yeah, I guess in the same way you could do Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence, Zhivago, and Ryan's Daughter all in one sitting and be totally exhausted afterwards. Um, yeah, but when when the long length is worthwhile, then I don't think it feels long. It's the old adage: you can take something out of a movie that's running too long, but then you make a 90-minute movie feel like 3 hours. And then if you have a movie that works perfectly, that's 2.5 hours, it feels like 90 minutes. So it's time is relative in that way. Basically, if you're being entertained, if you're involved in the story, it doesn't matter if it's 3, 4, 5 hours. Except the exhibitors will hate you because then they want to change houses, and then the studio wants to get more showtimes in a day. But let's see. Yeah, Pete points out, yeah, First Blood is technically, yeah, technically it may be an action film, but it's much darker and much more of a human drama. So it's like a human drama inside the guise of an action movie. Oh wow, Danny Boy, I watched Showa and all the companion films pretty much in a day and a half. Yeah, and that's such a heavy subject matter like that yeah, that would be hard to do all of that in one sitting. I guess in a lot of ways it would be like going to the National Holocaust Museum and spending the day there because going there and being physically confronted by everything, and it's a really great museum if you get to go. It's in Washington D.C. But actually being like physically confronted with everything, and it's the entire museum. It's not like just one exhibit. It just really just you know just it's like a gigantic weight just hit you in the head. Um, so yeah, I can see that. I don't know if I would do all of those in one sitting, but yeah, I guess I always try to watch all the extras whenever I watch something. So yeah, I usually just try to go through everything at once. But yeah, that's a lot to take in. Um, any laserdisc you prefer full screen rather than letterboxed? No, no, not really. I've had a history of trying to see obscure titles, and just to see them letterboxed, I have to watch like a bad dupe of a VHS transfer that was letterboxed or something. So I will take lower res if the aspect ratio is right. So um, the only couple I would argue are maybe the open matted titles, like titles that were specifically open matted and later on are widescreen only, or ones where the ratio is still debated, stuff like that. But outside of that, not really all that much. There are some titles with pen and scan laserdisc transfers that are really nice and sharp. But it just I can't stand watching something that's in the wrong ratio. So yeah, that's a no for me. Um, is Goldfinger sped up on the CBS Fox version? On the pan and scan one. Uh, I've got the. I have to think back for a second. I've got the CBS Fox Doctor No, and that one's fine. Um, I don't have the CBS Fox for Much with Love or Goldfinger. I don't think, but I've got all of the MGM ones that are 133, and those are also fine. Um, and it's really iffy. Since I don't have all the CBS Box ones and different things on the internet say different things, I think it's pretty much all the longer films that have the time compression. I always read that certain ones did, but then I got a number of the others and they had it too. Um, I think For Your Eyes Only was the first one that isn't time compressed because it was on two discs instead of just one. That's usually the giveaway. If the movie's 2 hours plus and it's on one disc of the series, it's probably got time compression. So, Live and Let Die, Man with the Golden Gun, Spy, Moonraker, they all have hysterically bad time compression. Um, and then I don't have For Your Eyes Only, but that one's two discs, so I think that one's fine. And then I have Octopussy, and that's fine. And Living Daylights is fine. I'm sure A View to a Kill is fine as well. But Doctor No, Gold For Much for Love and Goldfinger should all be fine because they're all way under 2 hours and fit onto one disc. But I only have Doctor No, and that one's fine. It doesn't have any speed up. But yeah, that's a good question because for the longest time they weren't listed on the database as having speed up, and then slowly people have been adding that. But I think it's pretty much it may be Thunderball through Moonraker that have time compression, but again, I only have certain ones. I never intended on picking all of those up until I got a couple, and the transfers are actually pretty good, and they have original art. And then I was like, well, I collected every other version, so. But I try to find them in good shape where they don't cost like ridiculous amounts of money because I'm like, I don't really need these. I don't want to pay like 10 or 15 bucks a pop for discs that I'm hardly ever going to watch because they're pan and scan. And especially with time compression on them, that makes them practically unwatchable. Um, the series where the hero starts out as a human in the first movie, then becomes a complete superhero later on is terrible. Like Rambo, Die Hard, The Zen, Alien, etc. Yeah, Die Hard is the one that hurts the most because it's all about being an everyday guy. And I think the first two exist in the same gritty universe, and then a three is still believable. It doesn't really feel the same because it's so expanded. I think the problem is they always feel the need to pair him with somebody, and that kind of defeats the purpose because the point of Die Hard is the fact that John McClane is by himself and he's having to relate to everything and talk to himself. But I still think Die Hard 3 works. But yeah, Die Hard 4 is where they just totally went to the stratosphere, and he's not just a human Energizer bunny; he's literally like a robot. So it's like, yeah, that's a little much, guys. I was still talking about Goldfinger. Yeah, the CBS Fox one has the laser beam cover. Yeah, I don't think I have that off. I'm pretty sure I've just got Doctor No of the CBS Fox ones, and this is making me wanted to go double check that again actually when I get done. So I will double check later on, but I'm pretty sure Doctor No is fine. Um, but I will double check, and I also double check if I actually have that version of Goldfinger. I don't think I do. But I think I just have the 133 MGM one with the white cover with Connery in the dinner jacket and the Connery collection banner. And that one pretty much just all those for Dr. No, Russia, and Goldfinger reused the old disc, but put them in the spiffed up jackets with the late 80s art. Because it was right as they were starting to do the letterbox titles. They were like, let's get these last Pan and Scan discs out, guys. So um, I will double check all of that just to make sure. Um, If he could set up 35 mil in a good house with a great projectionist, I would be happy as a teenager getting a Bugatti Veyron. Yeah. Oh man, I totally concur. And if we could get 70 mil in there, it would be even better. Because why not put it in your house? It would take up half the room, but if you have the money, why not? Um, yeah, Metro, be glad you didn't put on the old, Man with the Golden Gun CBS Fox one. Yeah, because it has, like the others at that time, it has pretty bad time compression. So it's like, um, it's not like it's worse even than PAL Speed Up. Like it's literally everyone is on super helium on those. And like you can pop on the beginning of The Spy Who Loved Me, and they're going around the submarine and the pre-title sequence, and it's like, Captain to the control room, Captain to the control room. Gosh, what's the line that sounded really funny? Gosh, what is it? The when the captain's looking through the periscope and has the dramatic, oh my god! But it sounds on the Pan and Scan old disc like uh, the music builds up and the music is too high pitched too, so the music is like wee wee wee. Oh my god! It's not that bad, but it's really bad. Um, but yeah, the Letterbox Golden Gun is fantastic, and the audio is really improved. Like the mono track on that sounds phenomenal. So yeah, I still spend that one up. That's my favorite version of the film easily. Uh, SpongeBob's dropped in. Hello, sir. Watching from Clearwater, Florida, with Family Guy on. Wow, that is yeah. Well, that's the way to do it, I suppose. um, let's see. Um, Trying to catch up on comments and such. Why do auctions on eBay take so long to end? Yeah. Well, honestly, I've never tried any of the snipering programs or the bid programs because I'm always like, no, everybody should be fair play. But I've been outbid at nanoseconds so many times that I'm kind of like, yeah, they must be using a program. So, and then you forget about stuff and then you miss stuff and then you just are like, curses. You're like, "That was great. It was only, 99 cents, and I missed it. How?" But then, somebody bid like $50 and you would have bid, and then, it wouldn't have gone through. But, you're just like, "Damn, I forgot." Um, yeah, I don't know if I'll ever try any of those. I guess maybe we all should since it seems everybody else does. But, yeah, that always sucks when that happens. Um Oh, Metro did watch the old Pan and Scan Golden Gun, yeah, and starts high and low for the letterbox, yeah. That's one of the hardest ones to find because it was one of the last ones along with the, License to Kill MGM reissue. That's why they had the slightly different art, and I think they were 1994, like late '93, early '94, but, yeah, those are really nice if you can actually track them down. Um Oh, Pete's talking about Jaws, okay, that's, I when everything gets split up, I'm trying to catch up, Da, 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 da. Yeah, Jaws. I mean, the new 4K version, and then the Blu-ray made from that. It is very good, but with anything Spielberg related, with the modern 4K stuff, there can always be some color tweaking going on, and there are a couple points like if you really like to freeze frame and do a lot of screenshot comparisons, things like that. Um, there are a couple places where if I wanted to be really nitpicky, I would probably say, yeah, that may not be. But of course, the 4K version probably, when it does eventually come out, there is a 4K DCP and it'll have an HDR grade. It'll probably be improved over the Blu-ray. But I wish they hadn't done the digital tweaks, like they removed some of the ships on the horizon, which again, I get that, but I wish they'd left it alone because I'm the one guy who still gets pissed off that they removed the snake reflection in Raiders. So I don't like the Raiders transfer because what they did to it, but I still hate they removed the snake reflection because I'm like, that's the spirit of this movie. It's supposed to be a cheap serial. Like that's a total cheap serial gaff. Like, you should leave it, man. um, okay, good. Yeah, joking. Okay. I just saw Daniel Craig and Casino Royale is the only true Bond. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for a troll joke. Yeah, that's it's out of your system now. Yeah, I get it. Let's see. How about Casino Royale is too much for one James Bond? Join the Casino Royale fun movement. There, I washed it out with a Casino 67 reference. Favorite gun barrel opening. Ooh. Yeah, the Dalton ones are great because it's like everything's perfect. There's the way he moves, the turn, especially the Living Daylights one. The Barry gun barrel for Living Daylights is probably the most perfect one, if that makes any sense. Um, it's classical but energetic, and I know it's weird. I'm just talking about the tiny gun barrel that opens each film, but it's important, even when they repeat it, repeat the same footage for the same actor in different films. Um, so, if we're just talking about the gun barrel, we're not talking about the music cue. Um, I don't know. It's hard to say because I like different ones for different reasons. Like I still to this day love the original Bob Simmons fedora wearing black and white gun barrel from the original three, and I like that Connery did his and kept the fedora and does the little pivot turn and is kind of has the wobble. And I love the fact that George goes on one knee and then they white it out to hide his face a little bit longer, which is a nice little quirky touch. Um, I love Rogers because he strides across. He appears so much taller. Of course, they redid it for Spy. So the original for Live and Let Die and Golden Gun, that was of course the first gun barrel I really saw, and I like that one too. And I like Pierce's, even though they have the gun barrel had pretty much switched to having the actual gun barrel part being CG instead of being done for real. So again, I like I like all of them, but yeah, if we're talking about actual gun barrel music cues, yeah, that one I'd have to get a little bit more picky on because they're all different in feeling. I really like Conti's For Your Eyes Only one. It's so dramatic and different. Um, and then again, I think the Living Daylights is like the most classical, perfect one. So if you had to pick like the best overall gun barrel, the most polished, it's probably that one. But again, I like them all. So I just can't stand the Casino Royale one. That killed me. The dripping blood and the CG and the turning and I was sitting there in the theater, and before it happened, I knew that's what they were how they were going to stage it. I could just see it coming, and I'm like, oh no, like I get it, but man, that hurts. And I've just talked about the gun barrels for 5 minutes. um, that is a great topic. It really is. You could totally get very, very specific about just the gun barrel music cues and then the actor footage. And most people Still don't realize Bob Simmons did the first three, and then Connery did one. Roger did two different ones. Uh, so there's a lot of different stuff going on, but most people have never really paid them much attention. Um, let's see. Uh, oh, Connoisseur found Never Say Never Again on Laser. Yeah, yeah, that is an excellent find. It's a little trickier to find, especially the widescreen one. It took me a while to find. That's because it's a Warner disc, but they um, I don't know why. It's just not as readily available. But and it's got the original Dolby Stereo mix, and I think that's a little bit better than the 5.1. But again, it's not a very good dynamic mix to begin with. So it's you don't expect a lot. Like the most surround that happens in that movie is the updated flying around missiles. That whole sequence. Like that's the only time you get surround activity. That and the like two or three action cues like during the car chase. That's it. Everything else, it's just like very mono. So, um, and the Laserdisc is great to get because the Blu-ray is out of print and has crazy prices. And of course, I can harp on about the problems of Never Say Never Again. Yet I watch it every year, and I have it on practically every format of VHS. So that's and I did a whole live stream about it. So. Um, oh, Melinda's waiting out a important eBay auction. Yeah, cross your fingers. Fingers crossed. Um, oh, Danny Boy was trying to get the anniversary Metropolis special edition. Only 25 bucks. That's not bad. I've really got to pick up a lot more of the Eureka stuff. They seem to be having a number of titles actually be marked down in price. So I think I need to just do a Amazon UK run and just grab a bunch of them because they do a lot of titles that Twilight Time does here, or even Criterion and some others. But as much as I would like to get some of those, sometimes the Eureka has better extras or is like significantly cheaper. So I was looking at I still hadn't gotten the 4K remaster of High Noon that Olive did as a signature title here. And then Eureka's just done it for the Masters of Cinema series. It just came out this week. It's got more extras, but it's the same transfer. And it looks a little bit cheaper. So I'm like, okay, I'm sold. Take my money now. Can I just give you my wallet and you give me like numbers 1 through infinity, and then I'll just be broke? Thanks. So it is really great when you go region free, especially in Blu-ray. I've been really surprised how cheap some of the British titles and labels can be. But of course, you always have to make sure you do the conversion and the VAT and everything right, and don't kill yourself with international shipping. Metro noticed some color tweaking in the 4K of Lost World. Yeah, it's definitely something that's there. The whole kind of furor broke out after the Raiders Blu-ray, and I think I got some of that started when I saw print of it before the Blu-ray came out, but it was the new version, and I was kind of like, this doesn't look quite right, guys. Just FYI. And then you have Close Encounters and Jaws, and they're very very minor, but there's qualms people have. And then I think some people even have some qualms about ET, and so I wouldn't be surprised about Jurassic Park, especially because they still haven't released the original DTS mix for the original film, and it's just been fans trying to preserve that, and they remix that all the time. So, oh, Garrick likes the Tomorrow Never Dies gun barrel. It is really good, and the Arnold cue is very, very in your face, and just like you go in, it starts, and you're like, oh yeah. Um, I also have a soft spot for the Twine one, even though it's much more electronic-y and it has those couple little like electronic noises and things. I just like the directness of it. It was also probably because I think I watched my tape of Twine like 1,000 times. So growing up, because it was the newest Bond film I had on tape, and I hadn't gotten official tapes for every film yet, so it was an easy go-to watch. So I would hear that over the VCR, and then I also had the PlayStation game that every time you started it, it would play a badly digitized version of that gun barrel. So I saw it a million times. Um, 70 mil is bigger than a house. That's impossible. Nothing's impossible. It's actually been done. There's actually a video or two on YouTube of a guy demonstrating a 70 millimeter projector, and it's clearly just like in his house in a room somewhere. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I've read there are some very wealthy individuals that have private screening rooms in their house and somehow have 70 mil in there. So it is doable, but it's going to take a lot of work. Um, Let's see. When the film goes dark, when they hide in high, there's a red tint to it that I can't get rid of. Yeah, there's a couple titles where people, if you read like on the Blu-ray forums, where especially with 4K being so new and everything, there are some titles where people are fiddling around with certain color settings on their TVs or displays, trying to compensate for certain things. So I don't know. Maybe if you dig through the thread on there, maybe some other folks have had similar issues and have tried to do something. If you find some reds in there that you just don't look right to you. Love TND to death. Yes. Um, Oh, you just got TND too, Brian. Yeah, that is. It's easily top five Laserdisc for quality. Easily, it's a fantastic disc. Unfortunately, it doesn't have extras like GoldenEye did, but the standard AC3 disc, $5 or $10. It's reference quality. It's got the great, amazing TND sound mix, and the picture quality is so good. I think it's better than the first DVD that came out. The color time is a little bit better. It has the burned in subtitles that the DVD didn't. And I've put that on for people and they don't even realize it's a laser disc. And I'm like, they're just like, wow, this looks and sounds great. And then I just hold up the laser disc jacket. They're like, what? And I'm like, yep. hmm Um, so that's easily top five for picture. And then the DTS one is just like, wow. But of course, it took me years to find one that didn't cost like $80 or something. Um, okay, got a couple more comments. And then, yeah, we definitely should get into Milius. We've just been talking in circles for an hour. Let's see. Um, I want the original DTS for Jurassic Park. Maybe someday life will find a way. Yeah, there are some fans who do some dedicated work on it, but unfortunately, having original audio is not a premium for people. Unfortunately, which makes no sense. Why would you do a whole restoration, new presentation, and then go, "Oh yeah, let's just junk the original audio. It doesn't matter." um, Oh, the Die Another Day barrel with the CG silver bullet because it was the silver anniversary and the 20th film. And yeah, when you're not expecting that and it's mixed up really loud in the mix, yeah, people in the theater were just like this. I remember because I saw it opening week. I don't think it was opening night, but I think it may have been opening night because it was a packed giant theater. But it was the opening week, and when that came through, and everybody was like this, ah, and they were all like, "What the hell?" Um, but yeah, it's part of the film. We have all gotten used to it. So um, I don't know. Maybe they were inspired by the bullet passing and the Goldeneye title sequence. But yeah, that's just that was too much. Um, Top Gun Maverick is coming out soon. Only thing that breaks my heart is it'll never be on Laserdisc, so there can't be 1 billion copies of it. Yeah, I used to not realize how much of a common title Top Gun is, and you see it everywhere. You see the old the old open mat one, and you see the letterbox one everywhere. But both are great for what they are. It's a laserdisc everybody should have. Great picture, great AC3 track, really nice jacket, and it's literally you don't have to pay more than $1 for it. And then the older disc, it's a little bit softer, but you get the 1:3 framing, which is pretty cool, and you get a matrix surround track that sounds pretty good. So you can get both for like $1 or two. Um, Anyone know where I can get a DTS decoder? Do you mean like an actual cinema one, or like something to just decode consumer DTS? Top Gun in every bin and LD lot, absolutely. Um, Universal, the same studio that junked the original Orca, yeah. There was that interesting story, though, about Spielberg always going back to it to get inspiration and relive the memories of the shoot because it was preserved on the backlot for the tour, and then he got on it once and it started sinking for real, and he started freaking out, and he had to dive off, basically. He had to get off of it, and then it literally sank, and he just stood there and watched it sink, and he's like, "Okay. Well, that was interesting." And then they had to, like, dredge it back up from the water, but, yeah, he got on it after all these years, and, it sank. So, I guess it was just like, "One more headache I'm gonna give you, after all this time." Consumer DTS decoder, trying to think. Basically, the easiest thing is just any receiver, and especially anything modern, is going to have DTS on board. So any modern receiver will do you fine. And then Laserdisc, you just run the coax out, and DVD, you use the digital connection. Same thing with Blu-ray and stuff. So any receiver will have DTS pretty much from the late '90s onward, unless it was like a budget model. But, yeah, anything modern from, like, the past 10, 15 years, it's gonna be on there, so, um, I think pretty much after the first couple years of DVD, it pretty much became standard for players to have it, so then they added it to every receiver, so I think pretty much every receiver, 2004, 2005 onward, you'll be fine, but, yeah, just I'd say go ahead and get something that's more modern. Oh man, looking through my telescope at the moon the other night, saw a dusty copy of Top Gun on the surface beside the flag. Oh man, that's fantastic. Yeah, so that's where it went. Yeah, all the stuff we put in the Voyager space probe to advertise humanity, the great recordings of the greatest pieces of music, the greatest works of art. And what did we do to get rid of our common Laserdisc titles? We just buried them on the moon. I guess the Atari landfill in New Mexico was already booked. So, uh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we should go ahead and into the Milius discussion. So that way I don't completely lose track of everything. So again, Milius is just a character you hear about a lot. You see his name in credits, and you don't really realize all the various things he's done. But when you actually look at it, he's only directed like a handful of movies. But he has his fingers in all kinds of different things because he was rusty right in the middle of the emerging new Hollywood generation of the movie brats that all came out of film school. And he was really right in there with the rest of them, very similar in a lot of ways to trying to challenge the establishment and the system of the studios that were dying. But what's interesting to note is his personality is so wildly different from everybody else, but yet, he was totally accepted and just another one of the guys, except the one who would, totally be the odd man out in every single way. And I think in a lot of ways, this persona he's cultivated for all of this time. And I think, especially if you watch the Milius documentary, which I highly recommend, I've meant to watch it for years, and thinking about Apocalypse Now afterwards and thinking about Milius some, I'm like, I finally should learn more about him. So I watched that finally. And I think that really answers a lot of things. That the whole persona thing, there is some posturing going on. I think a lot of ways it's because he likes to puncture the pomposity of people, and especially the suits at the studios and corporations and such. And because he's a very interested and very knowledgeable about history and the brutality of man throughout the course of history and war and conflict and things like that. So and I don't politically, yeah, we're total opposite ends of the spectrum, but again, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes you need dissenting opinions, so that way things don't get boring. So that's fine, but I think a lot of people kind of make a whole lot out of um the machismo and the whole persona that he's cultivated, and it's not it's not all that it's cracked up to be. And again, if you see the documentary, it makes a lot more sense. And I think there's so much other stuff going on in his personality and his outlook and stuff. I think there's a lot more to his ideals and what he's put in all of his screenplays and films he's directed and things. Um, but to get a good sense of the whole camaraderie between everybody and how everybody got out of film school and got into the industry almost by accident and everything, the easiest way to go is, of course, Peter Biskin's classic book, Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, which is the definitive book on all of these guys and just the craziness that went on. Although, as with any good story, things get exaggerated in the tellings and the retellings. So, you read this book with a little bit of a grain of salt. A lot of this stuff did happen, um, and it's not a book trying to be a tell all or whatever. But this is usually a book you can read 5 or 10 times and still be wildly entertained. It's also very revealing because it gets into how everybody got hooked up, how everybody fell out, how everybody would become friends again or not become friends again, things like that. And it's the only book to really go into um, at least a little bit about everybody. So it's not just George Lucas. It talks about Marcia Lucas a little bit, and you've got Paul Schrader in there, and Brian De Palma, and Scorsese, and all the other guys who were in New York while everybody else was in California. So it was like a separate scene of sorts, but they would all intermingle and things like that. So this is a really great book if you've never read it and you've ever been interested in this time period or any of these guys. But again, some of the stuff in here it is a little bit exaggerated, but it's still a great read. Um, and then, of course, I've not seen every Milius title, nor do I have all of them. But just to go chronologically, I guess what I'll do, because again, it's so hard to realize all the things he's done over the years. But just to go through chronologically, sort of the list of stuff he's been involved with in terms of writing or directing. So after he got out of film school, he wound up writing for American International at AIP. So sort of um, not as Coppola and others did, working directly under Roger Corman, but also getting his start in the super low budget side of things. And then immediately turns around, writes the screenplay for Evil Knievel, and then a little picture called Dirty Harry. So the reason why Dirty Harry and Magnum Force stick out so much as opposed to all the other sequels, which really don't add up to all that much, is the fact that Milius wrote the original drafts of Dirty Harry, and then he and I believe Michael Cimino was the other writer on Magnum Force, and then of course they were eventually removed and changes were made that they both really hated, but. The inherent darkness, the more mythic themes, um, the much more vibrant and far-reaching and I'm trying to think of the right words because like Dirty Harry got labeled as a fascist movie, which I think is not really accurate because by presenting all this stuff, it's inviting the audience to really question their own beliefs and is this something that is right and what does any of this mean? So there are at least the original film is much more deep in content and ideas and theory than anybody ever gave it credit for, and you can see flashes of that in Magnum Force, but again with a lot of other Milius things, there had to be concessions or other people came in and rewrote it or changed stuff around. But again, that's the reason why the first two films are the only ones that really pack a punch is because, Milius wrote the first one and he wrote the first drafts of the second one with Michael Cimino. But again, I didn't even realize that for the longest time. Um, but again, it's just like his name pops up everywhere. And like I was talking about before, he wrote Life and Time of Judge Roy Bean and Jeremiah Johnson, both of which were changed. Well, Jeremiah Johnson was changed somewhat. And then Judge Roy Bean was apparently changed a lot. And both of those still remain really interesting pictures from that time period. Um, and then he directed Dillinger, which is a really interesting retelling of the Dillinger story with a great Warren Oates performance. It's got a lot of energy to it, even though it is, on the lower budget side of things. I think in a lot of ways, its closest. Oh, it's similar to Scorsese doing Boxcar Bertha around the same time period. Low budget, sort of period piece about gangsters and criminals and things, but Dillinger is the more fun of the two. Um, and then 1975, you get to the aforementioned Wind and the Lion. This, I think, is probably the quintessential picture of all of his pictures because it blends all of his interests in history and the morals of humanity, and it's based on a real life story that, of course, has been heavily dramatized to explore all this stuff. But it's a really interesting film, and it has amazing sequences in it and amazing dialogue. I know I showed the gatefold before, but just to give you an idea. And basically, it's a to describe it very poorly, it's a combination of trying to go for a scope and scale of Lawrence of Arabia, but also at the same time keeping it more intimate. So that you can see the influence of David Lean in here. You can see the influence of Sam Peckinpah because there's two specific moments that directly quote the Wild Bunch visually and in staging. So there's a bit of Peckinpah in here, and it's a very odd picture to describe. I think its closest cousin would be Houston making the man who would be king in 1975. Also, Houston appears in this and has a great supporting role, but the real strength is Connery as the. I'm totally going to mispronounce this. I'm gonna. Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say as the Rasuli. I can't even begin to pronounce his whole name, and who's absolutely fantastic. And Brian Key's performance as Teddy Roosevelt, even though it's very, dramatized, like the themes that Milius gets into in these long speeches that he wrote for both these characters, but especially Roosevelt. There's a really famous scene where he's sitting in Yellowstone and they've killed this grizzly bear, and he's got the whole Hulk there, and he's having to give this interview to these reporters who are just jotting down every word he says. And he then starts comparing the American spirit and the American sense of self to the grizzly bear. And it's just a fantastic piece of character writing, and it's just so deep on so many levels, even if you don't agree with what's being said. Um, again, I think the ideas are so important that it helps hold the film up, even though I think there are I don't want to say deficiencies. It's not a perfect film, but when you see this, it had been a long time for me, but it was so much deeper and stronger than I remembered. Again, it's so much about the ideas and what's going on here that, again, even if you don't agree with the policies being displayed here, which again I don't. There's some stuff in here where you're just like, that's complete madness, and it's almost satirical in a few moments, and there's some really great moments that just make you completely laugh because you know that this has probably happened at some point in time. So again, some of the surrealism and the just complete ridiculousness that would later show up in Apocalypse Now, with having Colonel Kilgore blast Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries during the helicopter attack. That was all Milius. That was all in his script. So, and he had actually pulled that from things he had heard of, and of course embellished it, just as this is definitely embellished from a true story. But again, this is a really fascinating picture. Again, I don't think uh, Milius is really capable of doing run of the mill. And then the success of that film was overshadowed by the other picture of 1975, which of course is Jaws. And the reason why I bring up Jaws, you're like, well, Milius didn't have anything to do with that. Uh, Milius was consulted by his buddy Steve because they were having trouble on the boat sequence. And he asked him to help out. And Milius decided, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. They needed a short speech about the USS Indianapolis for Quint to relate. Um, so Milius comes back, and Spielberg has said this. I think he says it in the documentary as well. That John Milius sent back like 10 pages of just a complete monologue, and then Robert Shaw had to just sit there and like pare it down but they were all just astounded. And so basically, they just did exactly what Milius wrote, but Shaw had kind of pared it down line by line. And so the entire Indianapolis speech in Jaws is Milius, and it's one of the most amazing monologues in anything, not just films, but just in general. It's still stunning. I guess I've never tried to memorize it, but there are just moments from that speech. It's like 800 men go into the water. It's just like you feel every single ounce you feel like you're there. And of course, there's no cutaways, there's no stupid flashbacks, there's no anything. It's just a guy half drunk sitting in this boat while they're waiting to kill this shark who they can't happen to kill, and relating this absolutely horrifying, traumatizing experience that explains exactly why he's become this absolute crazy guy. So why he spends his life on a crummy old boat in the middle of the water all day, who knows? Um, but you never forget those moments. Like, gosh, I gotta make sure I do this right. A shark's got lifeless black eyes like a doll's eyes. And it just burns itself into your brain, and you feel the hairs on your neck stand up. And, I remember when I first saw it as a kid, the one line that stuck with me from the movie, it wasn't, "You're going to need a bigger boat." It wasn't, all the little funny lines I like to quote, or things like that. But the one line that stuck with me, and I didn't even realize what it meant at first. Um, I will never forget that when I first saw Jaws, all the one line I remembered was, uh, "And those black eyes roll over white." It's just like, oh my gosh! And it's referring to how especially in great whites, but sharks, their eyes will roll backwards, and it displays like this white. I don't know if it's muscle or gristle or something, but it's just horrifying. And then, and then he says, the whole damn ocean turns red. And then just simply says, "I'll never put on a life jacket again." It's like, wow. And then, of course, talking about dialogue and make sure I don't skip anything. Um, So after all those successes, he did finally get to do his big picture that he wanted to do in 1978, which is called Big Wednesday. I've only seen pieces of it, but it was his ode to surfing. He grew up in the surfing community and was a devoted surfer. So basically, if you've never heard of it, sort of imagine American Graffiti, but about surfers, and that's really selling it short. But of course, it was not really sold very well, not really distributed fairly, and in the post Star Wars boom, it was not really going to do very well. It's a pretty famous story that back at that time they would all share gross points. So Spielberg still gets his percentage point of Star Wars, and Lucas still gets his percentage point of Close Encounters. Well, they also did a deal with John Milius, and they're like, okay, well, you give us a point of Big Wednesday because you're going to make so much money. We'll give you a point of ours. So, so his movie Big Wednesday came out, went nowhere, died quickly, disappeared, and he got a percentage point of Star Wars. So, and then George is like, yeah, I never got anything for my point of Big Wednesday. So, um, I'm actually pretty interested to actually see it all the way through. Then after that, he contributed to the screenplays of I Want to Hold Your Hand, and then he also wrote on Hardcore, which I hadn't even realized, but he did. Again, he pops up in places you would not expect. So, um, actually, no, I take that back. I'm sorry, he produced both of those. I think he may have done a little bit of writing as well, but again, sometimes this stuff isn't credited. But then moving on to, of course, probably his most iconic work, which is, of course, Apocalypse Now. Um, Again, I was talking about this a little bit before at the start of the stream. The original idea was for Milius to write the screenplay, George Lucas was to direct it. It was going to be much more satirical, much closer to, say, a Doctor Strangelove tone. But the idea was to shoot it documentary style, low budget, maybe black and white, 16 millimeter, and give it a whole guerrilla style feel. And if you really look closely at a lot of the sequences, especially the earlier sequence, and especially all of the stuff with the cavalry and Kilgore and everything, you can see that sort of ridiculous heroic figure in Kilgore, and the sort of like very quirky satirical humor, very Doctor Strangelove-ish. Um, but then everything else in the film, you can still see the seeds of what Milius was going for, and you can see Heart of Darkness all over this because even though it's transposed everything to Vietnam, the whole spirit of the book comes alive and stays alive in the film, even though it's been completely changed around. So, in a lot of ways, this is still a great adaptation of the book, even though, of course, it's not actually doing the book. And Milius, I think, figured out the perfect way to realize uh, Conrad's amazing work in a completely different context. And this is the gatefold of the AC3 Laserdisc, which again is a really nice disc and has the all important original audio with a really amazing AC3 rendering. But of course, as we talked about on one of the last streams, you should grab the new 40th anniversary UHD version to get everything. Um, oh, Connoisseur's got to check out. Have a good one, man. Thanks for hanging out. Um, so then I got to refer back to this because half the time I can't even remember. Um, then another one you don't realize that he worked on, he wrote and produced on Spielberg's 1941. And once you realize that, then you're kind of like, well, yeah, I can kind of see some parts having his sort of humor in there, especially with the silly military posturing and things like that. Um, and then the big one that I think I can't decide if this is his best picture or Wind and the Lion is, but of course Conan the Barbarian, and this is the Universal double feature set with both Conan and the Destroyer sequel, which he very sadly did not get to do because he butted heads with Dino De Laurentiis, and they kind of moved on without him, which is stupid because he was basically the whole driving force behind the original film. And when I first saw this movie, I was shocked that it actually had substance, because you see the pictures, you see the stills, and you're just kind of like, oh, it's just Schwarzenegger with the sword, and he's bare chested, and this is just going to be silly. And then it's just like, oh, it's not. And there's a lot of grounding in various historical aspects, which I thought was really, really interesting, and signs that there was an intelligence at work behind everything. Um, Even though this was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, it wasn't a super huge budget. It has a mono mix, which is still on this DVD. That's why I picked this up. It is out on Blu-ray, and the sequel is as well, but I don't think they have their mono tracks, and I just have never upgraded from this. And now, since I'm doing this, I really want to rewatch this, and it's got a Milius commentary on the first film. But it was definitely sad that he didn't get to do the second film or the third one, which is pretty bad. But yeah, and this didn't get great reviews, but back in the day, but people really liked it, and I think they responded to it, even if they didn't have a lot of historical background knowledge, which again, I think it adds so much to the strength of the storytelling and the performances and everything. And yeah, this is the movie that convinced people that, hey, Arnold is actually a viable actor, and James Earl Jones has an absolute ball doing this movie. Um, but again, there are sensibilities in these films that maybe are not for everybody. They are rather dark. They are, a little bit, bloody. Wind of the Lion is the movie where Connery hacks guys' heads off. So I don't really think he can lay claim to that in many other pictures. But again, it works. It sounds strange, but it actually works. But yeah, Conan the Barbarian is the other big one, I would say, that is of super importance. And again, it's really surprising to go to because you think it's going to be something totally different. Um, and then he produced Uncommon Valor, and the primary one that I think most people know, and I think was the movie that really made his career kind of start to go off the rails a bit. He's complained some before about the possibility of being blacklisted in the industry in certain ways because of political beliefs and stuff like that. I don't really know or think that's the case, but I think in a similar way with some of these other guys, like Coppola especially, there comes a point in time where they start to, I hate to say go off the rails, but he started taking a lot longer between pictures after this particular movie, and there was a backlash against it. So, of course, we're talking about Red Dawn. And I think the idea of Red Dawn, the whole concept is fine. And I do appreciate the fact that it actually is dark and allows, you know, uh, essentially children to be forced with grim consequences. That's fine. It's the tonality where that really throws me, and I feel was perhaps not the best thing to do in the middle of Cold War tensions, where maybe things were starting to thaw. To have a movie where it's just like, well, we're kids, but we can go kill all the Russian invaders anyway. Um, and I think that's what most people reacted negatively to. And I know the original intent of the writers and everybody was to make like a strong anti-war film, but it wound up at MGM during their horrible time in the 80s where they were trying to get uh, back up and make these super big projects. And people were just playing stupid games of political moves and financial moves. And um, so they would build up these giant productions. They would start small and they would just build and build and build, and budgets would skyrocket. And like War Games was right there in that period. 2010 was right there in that period. And Red Dawn, basically, Milius was out there making this movie, and he was having to fight against the studio that wanted a different movie and thought he was making a different movie when he was making his own movie. So there was a lot of crazy stuff going on, simply because it was at MGM at the time. And so when it came out, it did do relatively well, but there was a lot of backlash, which again, for the reasons I said before, I think that's what people were reacting to, and I can understand that because I still kind of do that. I don't really watch it all that often, but again, I appreciate the fact that it allows itself to be, go to dark places. But again, I don't think the tone was really the best idea. So, um, it's a hard picture to discuss. I don't know what you guys think about it, but and definitely not the stupid remake, which I only saw part of, but it just seemed like a super stupid gutless thing to do, and I'm like, so so I don't know if you guys have any like thoughts or anything, but that's the one that I think is really hard to discuss, and I think that's what really got him branded of a certain image and type. Um, again, politically, I don't really, there are parts of Red Dawn where I'm just sitting there and I'm like, yeah, I don't really like this all that much. I get what they're going for, but it's like, yeah, I don't think this was the best idea to make. But again, I guess if you felt like you had to, um, but then after that point, he wound up doing a lot more script writing, and then it wasn't until 5 years later when he made the picture Farewell to the King, which was his next directorial effort. So 5 years, especially in the 1980s, 5 years without directing something's like an eternity. So I think that combined with sort of the negative fallout and the stereotyping, I think that's what really started to keep him from being on the top A list of hireable people. Um, and then after that, something I did not realize for the longest time, he did some of the writing, especially it was primarily to get Connery on board because Connery didn't like the fact that there weren't any really good speeches for his character. So the producer of the film managed to was apparently working near Milius, and this is again in the documentary. But went next door and said, "Hey, John, can you write some stuff for Sean?" And then he goes back on the phone. I could get John Milius, and then Connor is like, "Oh, that's fantastic." So of course I'm talking about Red October, which again I did not realize Milius had anything to do with. But basically, the really great little speeches that Ramius has are all Milius. So it's like once again we play our little game. Um, so again, I think this is one of the most underrated pictures of the '90s. I think this is the best picture John McTiernan ever directed. Yes, I think it's better than Die Hard. It's been a while since I've read the book, but I think the movie's actually better than the book, but I am going to reread the book. This is the really cool Paramount AC3 reissue with gatefold full of liner notes and a spiffed up transfer with 3 sides. And then, of course, got to have the original THX sticker on the shrink wrap, which I saved. But I've always loved this poster artwork. This would be another one I would love to have the poster of, simply because I just think it's such a great looking singular image. But again, this was another film I did not realize Milius had anything to do with. And when you realize that, you can look at certain scenes and go, okay, I see it now. That makes a whole lot of sense. Um, and then, yeah, some of these I've named, like this next one, Flight of the Intruder, was pretty much the last major feature he directed. That was in 1991, and I've seen it once a very long time ago, but I know there were like a lot of cost overruns, and it wasn't very well reviewed at the time. I remember it being semi interesting, but I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again. And then after that, his screenplay for Geronimo was directed by Walter Hill, which resulted in the Geronimo, an American Legend in '93. And this is an interesting picture if you've never seen it. It's not perfect, but again, it's a movie about ideas. When's the last time you saw a movie about ideas? Um, and this did just finally get released on Blu-ray, so you can pick that up if you desire. This is a pretty common Laserdisc title, just a Dolby Surround track, but of course it's a Sony disc. I don't really think it has a lot of rot issues, but it's possible to. And I want to say, I think, let's see, no sticker, better check. I think this is a Austria pressing. Let me see. Yes. I don't know. I'm going to see if I can get this to show up. But that's the reason why I got this, because let me see if I can get this to show up. There we go. DADC Austria, right there. The mark of, hey, I can actually watch this Sony disc all the way through. So, and it's actually a pretty good transfer on here. Pretty good sound mix too. It's actually a really good little film. It's again about ideas, and tries to do the story of Geronimo much more justice than had been done previously or since, really, that I'm aware of. But again, it's one of the last decent westerns about ideas. I think it would have been interesting if he had actually been able to direct it, but I don't know what that would have been like exactly. And then after that, he did do many drafts, apparently. I don't think he got the final credit. Let me see. Okay, so he is on the credit with Donald Stewart and Steven Zalian, but Milius wrote several drafts for Clear and Present Danger. Same producer from Red October, so I guess he was asked back. And I think that's what helps give this more gravitas over Patriot Games. But I think both Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger are good and solid and relatively well made. But I think this is the one of the two that has a little bit more meat to it, if that makes any sense dramatically. So that's probably a good sign that that had some Milius fingerprints on it. Again, it's interesting to see how much that his fingerprints are actually on. And then after that, he had written a screenplay about the Texas Rangers that was never made, and he wanted to direct it. And then finally, it was sold off and directed. I think it was made by Miramax. And let me see. Uh, yeah, it was Miramax, and they cut it up, and he hated what they did to his script. So I've never seen that. So I guess maybe at some point I'll check it out just to see what it's like. Um, he did do some episodes in television back in the day. He did some for the Twilight Zone revamp and Miami Vice and such. But his big thing, and I did not know this, the HBO series Rome was basically his brainchild. So he was a writer and producer on that. So I never really saw that. So now that I know that that was, he helped co-create that, I'm definitely going to check that out. Again, that's pretty much his career overview. It's not as varied as you might think, and I think the lack of stuff for significant periods is what really has really kept him from being recognized, and then of course him being so completely different from everybody else, and then the extremist stuff that he will talk about or bring up. And again, I think some of that is to just simply get through pomposity. um, but again, when you go around and say stuff like that, it's kind of hard for some people to take. um, so I totally get why some people think he must be this totally crazy guy. And what's really interesting, I never realized this, but uh, in the oh shoot, I'm blanking. The John Goodman character in The Big Lebowski is essentially John Milius. Like, it is totally John Milius. If you did a caricature of John Milius, right down to the glasses, always carrying a gun and being, this big guy, that's John Milius. So, and again, the Milius documentary, it's available streaming in some places for free, so you can check it out pretty easily. There's even a little bit they put a little clip of John Goodman at the end where he's like, "I didn't realize that's what they were doing. I hope he doesn't kill me sometime." But it really helps give you a better overview of all the stuff he's trying to do, and it's really cool to see, Lucas and Spielberg and everybody and Coppola that's still around, and Scorsese as well, and Paul Schrader and everybody actually talking about Milius. The other thing that should be said is he had a really bad stroke. I think it was 2010 or 12 or something, and so he's had to basically completely, rebuild himself. So I think it's said that he's doing much better by this point in time. But he was supposed to have been working on doing a movie about Genghis Khan, and that has kind of been put on hold all these years. But he did have a really bad stroke, which is why I think pretty much nobody's really heard of him for the past 10 years or so. And I hadn't really realized that. I think they were going to make this documentary before he had his stroke, and then he had this stroke, and so thus they had to just get a lot of interviews. So again, I think check out the Milius documentary, because prior to all this, he was somebody I knew of, and I knew he was, the one crazy sounding guy of that bunch. And you see his name dropped around everywhere, and he was friends with everybody. And I knew that he directed some, and I knew some of his films, and I knew some of the stuff he had written on, but I didn't realize the extent of his influence, and then the fact that he was literally in the thick of everybody's stuff going on. So again, I think he's of the guys who actually went and became directors, I think he's the one who is probably the least known. Um, I think probably more people know who Terrence Malick is than they do John Milius. Um, but that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this, because it's just it's been kind of on my mind for the past week or so. And I saw the documentary finally, and I was wanting to dig more into his body of work. And then I rewatched Wind of the Lion, and I was like, oh, okay. So I definitely would say Wind in the Lion and Conan the Barbarian are the two films to, if you really want to get started with Milius, or if you're looking to go back into it or really see something interesting. I think those two are like the key works probably. Um, Red Dawn is probably his most well known picture, but it seems a lot of people will like it for the 80s nostalgia, or the fact that all the kids become guerrilla warriors and everything, rather than it's supposed to be really dark and there are other themes going on there. Because I remember the first time I ever saw it, it was just, oh, it's this cool 80s movie and it's got terrible ratings, and I'm like, what? And then I saw it and I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, I can't believe somebody made this. And then when I put two and two together many years later, I'm like, oh, that explains it. Red Dawn was 20 years too late. Soviet Union began to collapse during its release. Yeah. Um, it's like, and then the remake, they changed it. I think it was originally supposed to be China, and then they dubbed and CG'd in all these. They just changed it to North Korea, which also doesn't make any sense. It's like This is not plausible, and also this is kind of silly in concept. And I mean, I get it, and yeah, all that stuff is a possible scenario, I guess. But to me, it's not as effective or as plausible as trying to think of something. Okay, I'll say this: I think a more effective and better political movie is actually The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, which is a comedy and from the 60s. um, I think it's actually more effective in a lot of ways and also isn't, super out there and, very, very polarizing as Red Dawn was. But that's not to say Red Dawn isn't effective. It is, but I think in terms of trying to get your point across without potentially, making everybody and an entire other country totally pissed at you. I think it's much better to be perhaps have some subtlety in there. So, um, yeah, I don't have a copy of it. There's a good MGM Laserdisc. There's a Blu-ray, and then I think Shout did a Blu-ray where they just added a random extra and just used the old MGM disc. But yeah, I need to rewatch it. It's been a very very long time. I don't know if I'll feel any differently towards it now, but that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this topic because I know people have total differing opinions on Milius if they even know who he is. That's the thing. He's not somebody that gets brought up very often, and so since I finally watched the documentary, I was like, well, I think I should bring it up just to kind of talk through it, and talking through stuff kind of helps me kind of figure out how I think about things anyway, because he's a very interesting individual and has made some truly interesting, very deep thematic works. Um, there's a really good quote in here. Let me see if I can find it again. Um, and so, and again, the political stuff that he'll go on about, it's not really I can't. I'm the total opposite of all of that stuff. But the fact that somebody um, did all of this work and stayed committed to what they wanted to do, I do you have to admire in a way because he did stuff in a lot of ways that was like what he and all of his buddies back in the day talked about keeping their ideals, where you could make the accusation or point out that not everybody else really stuck to that. And or maybe they compromised more. So again, I do think you would have to at least give him that. That for to make a very bad pun, he did stick to his guns. Yeah, it's a really bad pun. It was not intentional, but it's just the only thing I could think of. Let me see. There's a really I've got to find this because it's a really cool quote. Um, but it was about a doggone it, now I can't find this. Hmm. It still is really weird though to think about all of these guys hanging out with John Milius, especially, Lucas being, the guy who was so quiet that, when shooting Star Wars, everybody thought that, he just couldn't talk or had a throat infection. And Spielberg describes John as the scoutmaster of the group. So it's still strange to think that all these guys were literally just in school together and then just kept going and we're all buddies for years and years and years. Let me see if I can find this. Um, let's see. Where is this? Okay, here it is. This is a really great little quote. And again, I don't agree with um, certainly not most of the stuff he said actually. But this quote is really good. He said, never compromise excellence. To write for someone else is the biggest mistake that any writer makes. You should be your biggest competitor, your biggest critic, your biggest fan, because you don't know what anybody else thinks. It's arrogant to assume you know the market, that you may know what's popular today. Um, basically write what you want to see, because otherwise you won't have true passion in it, and it won't ever become true artistry, which again, is absolutely true in so many ways. And that is definitely the mindset that does not exist in 2019. So again, it's stuff like that. Like you understand where he's coming from, even if you may not theoretically and philosophically agree with all the directions he takes that to. So again, it's a hard thing to discuss, but I think it is an interesting body of work that should be discussed. Basically, um, okay. He's saying Rome might be the precursor to Game of Thrones in terms of swords, big battles, and political intrigue. Um, I think so, kind of, sorta. Like, I never got to see that, and I didn't see the Borgia series either. I think that was maybe on Showtime or somewhere else. So there were a couple shows like that that now I'm kind of like, okay, now I'm much more interested. Like I was interested because they were period historical pieces, but now I'm really gotta give them another look and check them out. Um, Christopher saw an episode or two, very very bloody. And not a lot of high-mindedness, and ancient history professors hated it. Okay. Well, I guess sometimes you just need some blood, I guess. Like I said, I forgot Wind in the Lion is the movie where Connery just, lops a guy's head off, and I totally forgot about that, and then I'm rewatching it, and then that happens, and I'm like, "Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, this is it's very, like, this is totally man's man stuff. Okay, yeah, I get it, John. I get it. I get it." Uh, so, um, I never really watched Game of Thrones. I gotta say, like, to me, it just seemed like a lot of blood, guts, sex, dragons, and I never thought that it was anything all that special. I never really watched it. So, and then it became such a worldwide thing that I'm kind of like, so I just kind of felt like I was in the dark. But I don't know. Everybody always talks about it, so I don't know. I'm not a TV guy. Like, I'll admit it. I'm not a TV guy. Um, Yeah, that's the other thing. Like if you look at Wind of the Lion, it's definitely not accurate to what happened in history, but it takes something that happened and uses it as essentially as a canvas to then make something new out of it. And I'm fine with that. What I hate is when they do true life or historical stories, and they go out of the way to make it seem like this is what actually happened, and then they just dramatize the hell out of everything. Um, so that for me, I was like, I much prefer that approach with Wind and the Lion, where it is something that happened, but it's not purporting to be the real story or the true account or anything. So, and also it doesn't completely take itself seriously 100% of the time, which also makes it much more palatable in that way. Yeah, I much prefer that to, something that's purporting to get everything right. So I don't know if Rome tried to do that or not. Again, I'd never seen it, so I just was surprised. I was like, I didn't know he did modern TV. I have to check this out now. Again, his fingerprints are on all kinds of different things. So, that wraps up that discussion, I guess. Um, so I'm trying to think if we have any disc news for the week or anything. And again, I hope everybody just go check out that Milius documentary. It's pretty much like the one work out there that really describes him more. I don't think there's like a biography or anything, but again, really interesting character. Just not talked about all that much. And again, there's really interesting stuff that he made. So that's why I wanted to bring it up and wanted to chat with you guys a bit. And I just think he's such an interesting character, really. Um, but yeah, I think the two key films again are Wind and the Lion and wow, I am totally blanking. Conan the Barbarian. So anyway, um, so oh yeah, what topic for next week? I'm always wondering, actually. That's the thing. I always can think of a million topics, and then when I actually have to make it, I can't think of any. So this time, I just put up what was on my brain at that moment. Um, uh, well, if you guys want to put up any suggestions, that would be cool. I think we'll definitely do move more into the classic horror realm for October when we hit next month, because we can do a whole bunch of stuff about horror and classic horror, especially because that's where my interest and adoration lies. Um, but Bert, oh, that would be great. Yeah, I didn't know if we should. Well, yeah, I guess we could just go straight into like actor studies and things. And honestly, that's a good way to talk about a bunch of different things because you can talk about different directors, studios, producers, writers, all kinds of stuff. Um, and Bert has such an interesting filmography and all the stuff he would try to do, being the first actor to really have a successful independent production company. The fact that they won the Oscar on Marty, which was a, independent production that was produced by, an actor's company. That was pretty much unheard of in the industry. And, he always seemed to be trying to do different things. And, never gave an unconvincing performance ever. Um, and every time you see him in something, he's just so completely invested. Um, Trying to think, if I had to, I couldn't even choose a favorite of his. Um, there are some that I think are just phenomenal that don't get talked about enough. Like everybody talks about Sweet Smell of Success. They'll talk about Elmer Gantry. They may talk about Birdman of Alcatraz, but I think 7 Days of May is equally important. And of course, Burt was really the guy who got John Frankenheimer started on Young Savages, and then brought him in to do both Birdman of Alcatraz and then do take over on the Train, which is a heck of a picture. That's still just really gripping to this day and really dark. Um, and the fact that they made the Monuments Men about the same topic, and I'm like, guys, like, why are you even going to bother? Like, you're competing against Frankenheimer and Burt Lancaster, and you've made the most boring movie I've seen all year. Like, what are you doing? um yeah, Brute Force, Lawman, oh gosh. I guess if I had to say, probably my favorite picture that Burt was in that I think is extremely important and super underrated, Vera Cruz. Vera Cruz is one of the all-time great westerns. It's not talked about enough. It's so important. It's brutally dark. It's for, the fact that it was made in 1954. It seems like a 60s movie. It's so dark. And they went and shot it in Mexico, and it was completely independent. And they were the first film to shoot entirely in Mexico, if I'm remembering correctly, because Church of the Sierra Madre shot in Mexico, but they didn't do it completely there, I believe. But Veracruz is directed by Robert Aldrich, is a brutally dark, cynical western that's a huge influence on Sergio Leone. Uh, um, right down to the fact that the central characters are reflected in For a Few Dollars More. The outfit that Frank wears in Once Upon a Time in the West is Burt Lancaster's outfit in Veracruz. So that is another time they directly referenced it. So Veracruz is one of the many westerns that is directly referenced in Once Upon a Time in the West. Um, but if you've never seen it, it is one of those like just landmark important westerns, and it, again, is super dark, very self-aware in a sort of modernistic way. And the pairing of Burt with the aged post High Noon, much wiser, wizened Gary Cooper is just fantastic. So yeah, that's probably my favorite, for lack of a better term, my favorite Burt deep cut. So that would definitely be a interesting talk. And yeah, the most important thing, he always had some type of hand in the production, the style, because he wasn't just going to sit around and make something stupid. So, um, in that, I will always admire about Burt Lancaster. Always, if only everybody cared that much. Um, Favorite HBO show? I don't really know that I have one actually. I've never been a TV guy, and usually if I do watch a show, it's usually an older show I'm catching up on, or I just come to something way later. So I don't know. I've seen a number of shows over the years from HBO, like a number of random episodes, but I've just never really been that big on any of them. I'm not a TV guy. I hate to keep saying that, but it's true. You'd be like, do I want to watch this HBO show? Or hey, look at this obscure pre-code movie from the 1930s. I'm like, hmm, this wins. It's not really a fair competition. Um, so yeah, I guess we'll throw in some actor filmography discussions. That'll be pretty cool. And of course, I can run through the list of just some my more of my favorite directors, and then maybe some writers, and then maybe some specific uh, films and such. And yeah, Gary Cooper would be another great one. I just recently read a the Cooper biography. I think it's trying to remember if it's American Life or American Hero, but it's from the like late '90s, early 2000s. But it's like the only I think there's a couple of Cooper books, but I think that's like the main one. And yeah, he has a really interesting life story. Very interesting character. And I don't know if there is a I mean, people might still recognize Gary Cooper, but they don't recognize him for the great actor that he was, and really, in a lot of ways, pioneering a lot of screen acting technique. Because the stuff he could do, and I think a lot of that comes from, of course, starting in silent films. But he had a style that most people would call, minimalism. But he really knew every single inch of what, the response of a camera would be, and could just use that to the hilt. So, um, and of course, his early days, he had a much different image, in the pre Mr. Deeds years. And I think Mr. Deeds was the film that really got the, symbol of America draped on him that he never quite escaped. So the fact that he was supposed to be, the screen's great lover in his early career. It's just like, this seems strange, but he was, and apparently in real life as well. So, you know, but he was always a, fundamentally decent fellow through all of that stuff. So again, that does not always happen in real life. So, but I do think he is just I think most actually, you can make the case for most innovating actors or actresses in the classic Hollywood period are just not properly respected today because people may react differently to the styles being different because of the time, the way movies used to be made, the stylization of times gone by. But I think you could make that case for anybody, and Cooper is a huge example. And it's not like you have young actors today talking about their influences anymore. It used to be Cooper, and it used to be some others, and then the next generation it was Brando and Clift and the method acting, and then after that it was Pacino and De Niro and really intensive actors, and now it's like, well, who do you got left? It's like, it's like there's the law of diminishing returns, I suppose. Um, oh, the von Sternberg and Dietrich Bach from Criterion, yeah. Oh man, I've got to get that. Those are hugely influential, hugely important, and you can't possibly overrate them. They're fantastic. And the Cooper biography that it goes into, how he and Dietrich, actually kind of hit it off and had an affair, of course. Um, and it's odd to think the pairing of those two, but apparently sparks flew both on and off the screen. Um, the Killers and Brute Force back to back, and then big scene is Mr. Normal America. Yeah. Um, yeah, and the thing is, Gary Cooper couldn't get away with that, but Burt Lancaster could. Like, there are great roles, and then they're really out there. And then he turns around and does a pure swashbuckler like Flame in the Arrow, which is a great adventure film if you've never seen it. And then he does The Crimson Pirate, which is one of the great pirate films. And then he'll do Elmer Gantry, or he'll do Vera Cruz, where he's basically playing Satan in a cowboy hat and just grins psychotically the whole movie. Um, and then turn around and do Sweet Smell of Success, where he's basically a cold, evil demon of a guy, who seems like he has no emotion. And or The Train, or I think 7 Days in May is that the performance there is just wow. And that's totally different to what his own philosophy was. The fact that he got that level of conviction. Um, I think the end scene between he and between Burt Lancaster and Frederick March in 7 Days in May in the Oval Office of the White House. I think that's an acting masterclass. Like, if anybody brings up the coffee table scene in Heat again, I'm gonna go, get better experience. Like, you want to talk about a master class in acting in one scene, go to the end of 7 Days in May. Like, that sequence, and then to find out that Burt Lancaster had a cold at the time, it's just like, how do you do that? And you're not even in top condition. Um, and that's just a powerhouse scene. Um, or and there's even another great small scene at the end of 7 Days in May, where it's the great small scene where Kirk Douglas, his character Jigs Casey comes to Lancaster's character, and they meet in the hallway. And I'm trying to remember the exact wording because it's so amazing, but where Bert just stares like he's emotionless, but he's staring through Kirk's face. And when he just like bites out the words, do you know who Judas was? And then Kirk's character just responds with that fantastic line. Um, yes, I know who Judas was. Um, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the exact wording because I know I'm going to mess it up. But he said, "Yes, I know who Judas was. He was a man I respected and admired until he disgraced the 4 stars on his uniform, and then he just walks off into the silence, and it's just like, wow." And then you realize that Rod Serling wrote the screenplay for the film, so then it's just like, yes, that's why this movie is so good. Uh, everybody in that film is fantastic, and it's completely underrated. And it's probably Rod Serling's best film screenplay, like his most fully polished and fully realized screenplay. And it was sad that he never really got that opportunity to really write feature screenplays. But yeah, there's great stuff in there. And now I've gone off on another tangent, so sorry about that. Um, David Lean was the first ever director attached to a Dune adaptation. I think I've read that somewhere that David Lean was attached to doing Dune, but I'd kind of forgotten about that. But now that you say that, it kind of rings a bell. But that seemed to kick around for so long that a lot of people get attached to various things. So then it becomes like a trivia factoid that, oh, well, so and so was going to direct blah, 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 blah. And then you're like, well, when did that happen? Oh, some agent packaged it, and then they dropped out, and then they dropped out, and it just goes. And it's amazing that Dune ever actually got made in the first place. And we all know what happened there. So, um, yeah, the Cape Fear remake, it's not a film I go back to all that often, but it does work. I think because Scorsese and everybody changed so much of the original movie that they weren't just simply remaking it. But that being said, every time I saw or even think of the remake, all I can do is think of, oh, it's Cape Fear '90s version. Like every character has problems. The lead character is not such a good guy anymore. It adds a lot of shades of gray, and it's a lot more viscerally darker. But I gotta say, I still, to me, it's nowhere near as good as the original movie, which is supremely underrated. Um, and then the fact that you're comparing to a picture that has Greg Peck and Robert Mitchum. And I think J. Lee Thompson was actually a very good director and is extremely underrated. And when he had good material, I think he was really, really good. And he and Greg Peck had worked on Guns of Navarone, so they had a mutual respect for each other, and that always helps. And again, I think the black and white photography adds so much to the mood that I think it really loses out in the remake being in color. Um, and then you basically have Mitchum doing a it's of course a completely different character, but the darkness is similar in a lot of ways to the preacher and Night of the Hunter. Uh, but it's the Max Cady character is so completely more obviously psychotic and just completely unhinged. But there's a quietness to it. It's not just like in the remake where De Niro's character is obviously psychotic and obviously wants to kill everybody. But in the original, the characterization, Mitchum pops up and he's so frightening because it's like he's a coiled spring and you never quite know when it's gonna go off, but you know that spring is gonna go off and he's gonna kill somebody, and it's so much more. Um, Gosh, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's so much more, not just evolving, but so much more. At least to me, it's so much more interesting and exciting when it's the old adage of suspense versus surprise. You know something's going to happen. You know this is a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, but they don't know, and you're just waiting for it to happen. And the fact that it builds through the original, I think, is what makes the original so much better for me. But I do appreciate the remake. I don't really think it was necessary, but I can see what they were going for. And in a way, it kind of fits in with what they were doing in the 80s with the remakes of noir classics. Um, I don't know if that's why they did it, but pretty much when Lawrence Kasdan made Body Heat, basically redid Double Indemnity for the 80s, but it wasn't a remake. It was like a spiritual remake, so that's why I can live with it, But I don't really watch those movies all that often. I of course have I can't I don't watch Against All Odds very much, and Culture Dog and I get into it because I'm always like, how could you remake Out of the Past? Um, but I mean, it's okay, but I never watch it. So I'm not at that level with the Cape Fear remake because I do feel the Cape Fear remake is at least different for a reason, but I still prefer the original. Um, Melinda's out filling her cup. Yeah. Yes, Billy Wilder. That's perfect. I thought of that before, but I wanted to do this on Milius because I'd been just thinking about Milius post doing Apocalypse Now again. So that's what got me all on the Milius tangent, and then I started digging more and going through the online articles and then going, oh, that's right, he did this and that and that and that and he did that and he did that, he did that. So that's why I was like, I better just talk about it. Um, but yes, Billy Wilder, I think I have an old adage. I like people are always like, "Oh, well, where do you go to learn stuff, or where do you go to da 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 da?" And my adage has always been, "I learned more about life from Billy Wilder than I did from anything else." So, and I think that's completely true. I think you can learn more about the mysteries of the insanity that is humanity from a Billy Wilder picture than anything else. I don't think anybody else understood the nature of life as bitter irony than Billy Wilder. I think he just totally um, had such a unique style, vision, wit, intelligence, outlook that is just unmatched, really. Um, of course, he in a way his hero was Lubitsch, and he started out writing for Lubitsch when he came to Hollywood and wrote Ninotchka among other things. So there is a sort of connection there. but he did his own thing in a vastly different way. It was much darker, and that's why I've never liked his lighter films as much. Like, yes, some like it hot is a classic. It is a masterpiece, but it's not my favorite Billy Wilder picture because it's just a little too happy for me. So, but when I was growing up and I finally saw Double Indemnity and I saw The Apartment and things where they were really dark or they were funny, but they had so much slices of what felt like real life, and there was inherent darkness in it. And I'm like, finally, somebody who gets it. Um, and then, films like Private Life of Sherlock Holmes just really just not only blew me away, but just really touched me in a certain way. But and then I saw Ace in the Hole finally, and it was all over. So, Sunset Boulevard is staggering. But Ace in the Hole, is I think Ace in the Hole quite possibly is Billy Wilder's masterpiece and quite possibly the best movie about America ever. It's so bleak, scathing, dark. It's quite possibly the most scathing film noir of them all. It made no money. It got banned everywhere. Everybody hated it, and I had to spend most of my life reading about this movie that everybody hated, that made Billy Wilder have to go make things like The 7 Year Itch because it failed so badly. And then when I finally got to see it, I was just obliterated. Um, uh, oh gosh, Twilight Zone especially. Actually, it's ironic. I finally talking about Twilight Zone. It's not here yet, but I did finally get the Blu-ray set. I finally found a decent price copy. So I've been waiting to. I always miss like when they have the flash sales and you can get it for like $25 or some ridiculously low price. But I had some PayPal credits saved up on eBay, and I found one of those big selling groups was apparently had an extra Twilight Zone box, and so I just used my extra PayPal stuff, and so I was like, "Yes, I'm finally getting this now." Um, oh gosh, I mean, Twilight Zone is just at least that's well known today. At least people will know Twilight Zone and they recognize the timeless quality of the storytelling. And it's not so much the horror elements, but for me, what always stuck out was the episodes that were especially more, about ideals. And you could really, once you know more about what Sterling always tried to do, when you could really hear his voice in the series, even if it was something he didn't write, like it fit in with the same ideas and it was pushing television in ways that just nobody was doing. Um, and I love especially the ones that, are small, intimate human stories that have no horror elements whatsoever. And then all the talent that was there and all the great writers that were there. And, the just everything that spawned out of it, was amazing as well. Um, but yeah, I do wish Serling had not had his career kind of curtailed in many ways. And of course, he died young, which was also extremely unfortunate. So, but he's been somebody I've admired for practically my whole life and still do. So, absolutely. I even love some bits of Night Gallery, and of course, he didn't have full control over Night Gallery, which drove him crazy. But there are some good night galleries, and of course, the first night gallery with the three films cut together to make a feature, of course, is most famous for being having the early Spielberg effort in the Eyes piece with Joan Crawford, which is a great little piece of direction. So that's of course essential for Spielberg nerds like myself. Uh, yes, kids, David Lean's attempt actually predated Jodorowsky's famous attempt. Uh, Oh gosh, I could talk about Kirk Douglas until like next year, and it's still I still love the fact that he's still with us. He's still alive and kicking. He's written a number of books over the years, and he's actually a really good writer. I've read a number of them. Simply because I was like, well, I have to read this. And then he also wrote a book about specifically about Spartacus, which has some good material in there that even I didn't exactly know. So, you know, I, I'm still amazed, it's like, yep, he's still with us. He's still alive and kicking. And, he still shows up from time to time. And of course, post stroke and everything, and he's still going along. Uh, but gosh, yes, supremely underrated. So many great pictures, great performances, even, and not so great pictures. Just fantastic. Um, and with such a tenacity, and that's what made him such an interesting pairing with Burt Lancaster, and the fact that they were actually friends, and they played off of each other so well, and they would always, uh, you know, they're similar but completely different, which is really odd. It's not common that you have a pairing like that where it's two guys who are extremely strong and extremely forceful presences, but they're also completely different. So technically, you would think they would hate each other, but they don't. So, um, but yeah, like yeah, like just especially Ace in the Hole. Ace in the Hole, I think, is probably his most just again scathing performance, but it's just phenomenal. And then of course, Passive Glory and Spartacus and so many, and he could do small, he could do restrained. It's really seeing him in Strange Love of Martha Ivers, which is a great noir where he plays a very buttoned down, very non-emotional character, always in a suit behind these glasses, playing the brother character. Um, and then realizing that he started movies and Out of the Past, and as one of the great villain figures of noir is Whit Sterling. And, when he's first introduced and he's going toe to toe with Mitchum in his most iconic role, and completely just suave looking, seemingly charming. But again, every single word that comes out of this grinning face, he could just totally murder everybody on the screen at any minute. So, yeah, just absolutely fantastic. Um, yeah, again, I know I went into it a lot, but I do think the Scorsese Cape Fear is a good remake, and at least, they were like, well, we're going to remake this, but we're going to remake it for a reason. We're not just going to literally do it over again, and we're not going to change it so much you don't recognize it, but we're going to change things that are constructive. So it will be different. So I give it that, and I watch it every once in a while, but I I like the original, and I think the original is hugely underrated. So I'm always like, I could watch the remake, but why would I? So, but yeah, every once in a while, I'll rewatch the remake. So I think we're starting to wind down, and in lieu of having a lot of dead silence and stuff, um, I want to say I think we've got a number of good ideas for the next couple shows, and Miss Brian said 50 sci-fi. That's perfect. I should have thought of that already. That is absolutely perfect. And that's a period and a slice of time that I know of a lot more films that I haven't actually seen, so I'm not as well versed, and I've been meaning to get better versed for a long time. So there's a lot of important films, like that I know of or have seen pieces of, but I've never seen them all the way through, or it's been a long time. So you got to talk about everything from Destination Moon to When Worlds Collide, and then of course including the sillier stuff like Earth versus Flying Saucers, and then the important, truly important stuff like Daily Air Stood Still and Forbidden Planet. Those two are probably, like just about the bedrocks of science fiction in the modern parlance of being like the two serious, groundbreaking bedrocks of uh, properly respected science fiction films. Um, and of course, it goes from there, and there's so many others. Um, and then you can enjoy the goofy ones, and you can go from there. But yeah, it's such a hugely important time period that people know like the iconography, and they know some of the goofy stuff, and they know the title fonts and the titles and the sort of 50 stereotypes in there, but they haven't actually seen a George Powell movie, or they haven't seen Day the Earth Stood Still or Forbidden Planet. Those two, again, I think they're just about the most important ones, and I think I really wish they were better seen today. So that would be a great topic because I will admit I am not as well versed as I would like to be, but at least I know of most of them. Um, let's see. Um, Yeah, it's hard to have a favorite Billy Wilder film. I don't really. I flip-flop really a lot. I always try to figure out what's his best picture, and I can't decide between Ace in the Hole and The Apartment because Ace in the Hole is so scathing, but The Apartment is so much like real life by having the balance of the light and the dark, and is so perfectly designed, and is also a very much tribute to the Lubitsch style while still being modern. Um, so I go between those, and you could say Double Indemnity, you could say Sunset Boulevard, and I absolutely adore Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. And there's so many. There's just um, you can't pick just one. um, and so and some like I introduce you to one of your biggest crushes of cinema. I think we all have a number of those. And then you just are like, oh well, I love them in such and such, and I love them in such and such, and I love them in such and such, and you're like, wow, I really do like them. Um, so yeah, I think we all have like a mental Rolodex of screen crushes. So um, oh, Melinda's checking out. Yes, as always, keep spinning shiny discs. Thanks for hanging out, Melinda. Yeah, I think it's probably about time for us to start wrapping down anyway. Um, like I said, it was a interesting discussion topic. I've not as much to talk about, of course, as last time because last time we had just one of the most massive bodies of work to discuss, and I'm so well versed in Hitch, I can go on for like 4 hours about one movie. So, but yeah, definitely, I'm gonna incorporate a lot of these ideas and try to keep coming up with uh, good topics. And I can, if I get going, just like with some of these comments, if I can get going, I can get going for a while and just like one question. So um, definitely stay tuned for further live streams and updates and such as usual. And hopefully, I can get the technical qualms worked out finally, so we don't have another fun time jumping around trying to get everything going. But I want to thank everybody for hanging out. Hopefully, you learn some stuff or decide to jump into some Milius films or Milius writing and stuff. Like I said before, extremely interesting character, just not talked about very much. And I'm not plugging this book, I promise. But again, I think the Easy Riders Raging Bulls is just one of those books that everybody should read. If you're a film nerd at all, you've probably already read it or heard of it. But it's one of those you just have to read. So very, very highly recommended. So anyway, thanks for hanging out, everybody. Thanks for making it another fun live stream. And as Belinda said, always keep spinning your physical media while we still have it going. Um, so as always, have a better one, everyone.